Chapter 41. New System Features. Merged Chests. The Ultimate Plant Collection. Why did it fail? Blake Grenville asked through gritted teeth, frustration evident in his voice. The resentment seed system remained silent, offering no explanation. With a sigh, Blake turned his attention back to the system panel. The interface was rudimentary, reminiscent of something hastily assembled by an inexperienced programmer. Awakened talents, photogenic memory, top-grade academic genius, proficient subjects, beginner transformation, beginner magic spell, proficient skills, top-grade cooking, beginner brain seal, proficient incantations, top-grade weather spell, applied templates, Gandalf, great druid. Beyond this, the panel offered nothing more. Blake scanned the interface, searching for the elusive experience bar. This doesn't make sense. If there's no experience bar, why bother rewarding experience? He muttered, examining the simplistic interface once more. In a moment of disbelief, he tapped on the beginner transformation talent. Suddenly, the interface changed, revealing an experience bar beneath the selected skill. Ah, so it requires selection to display, Blake noted, a hint of annoyance in his voice. The experience bar indicated he had accumulated 1,150 points, with a daunting 100,000 points needed to advance to intermediate transformation proficiency. 100,000 points for a single-level advancement? Blake couldn't help but exclaim. However, recalling the 1,000 points he received from a silver treasure chest, the goal didn't seem entirely out of reach. Moreover, he entertained the possibility of directly unlocking a higher level, as he had with the top-grade weather spell proficiency. Blake pondered the inefficiency of skill-specific experience points. How much better it would be if they could be freely allocated to any skill, he mused, turning his attention to the other rewards. He discovered an option for automatic conversion into experience points. Having already mastered a top-grade prophecy talent, the reward for advanced prophecy talent was converted into exclusive experience points. This suggested the possibility of receiving duplicate rewards in the future. Blake found the proficiency in basic subjects to be a less exciting reward, given its commonality. However, the 5,000 gold coins were a welcome addition. Despite Dumbledore's wealth, Blake's allowance was modest, and his previous earnings had been converted into gold coins at Gringotts. Without a steady income, his savings were quickly depleting, especially with the costs associated with raising magical animals. The need to purchase food for these creatures was a significant expense. Fortunately, Blake's magical menagerie did not include any particularly voracious eaters, allowing his savings to last longer. Yet, the difference in rewards between the bronze and silver treasure chests was striking. A bronze chest yielded 50 gold coins, while a silver chest provided 5,000. This variance suggested that chests of the same quality could contain vastly different rewards, with the silver chest likely hitting a critical reward. Reflecting on the rewards from the silver chests, Blake felt satisfied with his haul, particularly the seed of the mutated devil's web, a rare and valuable item that couldn't be purchased elsewhere. Blake was astounded by the system's rare description of the seed he had just acquired. It was a devil's web seed, notable for its resilience to light and high fire resistance, though it wasn't entirely immune to fire damage. Intrigued by its unique qualities, Blake decided to store it for later planting. His attention then shifted to the gold treasure chest before him. As he was about to request the system to open it, a realization struck him. He could interact with the system's virtual interface directly. With a flick of his finger, he tapped on the gold treasure chest, and to his surprise, he was given the option to select it. Even more astonishing was the discovery that followed. In the lower right corner of the system space, a new option appeared: Merge. Blake's voice trembled with excitement as he pondered the implications. Next to the Merge option, a small line of text explained that 10 gold treasure chests could be combined into a diamond treasure chest. This revelation led Blake to deduce that lower-level chests could similarly be merged into higher-level ones. The realization filled Blake with a sense of greed he hadn't known before. He now faced a dilemma. Should he open the treasure chests as he acquired them, or save them to combine into higher-level chests for potentially greater rewards? After some contemplation, Blake decided on a strategy. He would open the bronze treasure chests immediately, then upgrade them to silver, and so on, saving the higher-level chests for later combination. This approach would balance the immediate benefits of beginner skills with the potential for more valuable rewards in the future. "I'm so greedy," Blake lamented, half in anguish, half in jest. At the moment, he lacked treasure chests of other levels, leaving him uncertain about the exact requirements for combining them. Nonetheless, buoyed by the discovery of the system's new function, he eagerly began opening the treasure chests. "Gold treasure chest, open," he commanded. Ding! The system is opening the gold treasure chest. Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining a supreme-grade plant collection bag. Blake's excitement surged as he examined the collection bag's description. It was capable of containing a wide variety of plants, including herbs and magical plants, without affecting their normal growth. This meant he could now carry an assortment of plants with him at all times, ready to deploy in combat or other situations. "Starting from today, I can carry a multitude of plants with me. If I ever find myself in a duel, I could unleash an arsenal of biting Brussels sprouts." Blake mused with delight. The bag also offered a solution for safely storing dangerous plants without risking their discovery by Dumbledore. However, the bag had a capacity limit of 20 individual compartments, meaning he could carry no more than 20 plants at a time, with each plant occupying its own separate space. "It seems I can now make immediate use of the mutated devil net, and all the seeds Cassandra sent me have been planted," Blake concluded, his mind racing with possibilities for how to best utilize his new acquisitions. Chapter 42. Number 4, Privet Drive. Overwhelmed by letters, Blake pondered over the seeds Cassandra had sent. He retrieved a small cloth bag and spilled its contents onto a piece of parchment. The seeds, a jumbled assortment, lay before him. It appeared Cassandra had haphazardly filled the bag without sorting them. Blake, although initially daunted by the task, found sorting the seeds to be a minor inconvenience. With patience, he managed to organize them after more than an hour. His count revealed an equal number of each variety: 50 mandrake seeds, 50 poisonous tentacle seeds, 50 devil's snare seeds, 50 Chinese chomping cabbage seeds, 50 bubatuber seeds, 50 venomous tentacula seeds, and 50 knotgrass seeds. Blake was initially under the impression that Cassandra had carelessly thrown the seeds into the bag. However, the equal distribution of each type suggested otherwise. He imagined Cassandra meticulously dividing the seeds before stuffing them into the bag with a mock threat. "You know so much, then sort them yourself. You'll be exhausted." This was quintessentially Cassandra, presenting a carefully prepared gift as if it were a thoughtless gesture. Meanwhile, at Vor Manor, a conversation hinted at a mysterious shortage. "Have you noticed the seeds we bought seem to be a lot less?" one asked. The other, skeptical about counting each seed, didn't notice the discrepancy. Unbeknownst to them, a small figure stealthily made its escape outside the window. The following morning, Blake was playing with Sniff, now affectionately named Dabao, tossing a gold coin for the creature to catch. Dabao, unaware that the coin was merely a transfigured object, gleefully pocketed it. Nearby, an eagle owl watched with a mix of pride and disdain. Having selected a few magical plants to cultivate overnight, Blake planted them in a special collection bag capable of accommodating up to 20 plants, regardless of their size. He marveled at the system's products, contemplating the possibility of even planting a whomping willow. As he entertained Dabao, a knock at the door interrupted their play. Dumbledore stood outside, bearing the weight of important duties. Blake, curious but indifferent, inquired about Dumbledore's errand. Misinterpreting Blake's casual demeanor as disappointment, Dumbledore felt a pang of guilt for not spending more time with the child, relying instead on house elves sent by Grindelwald for the boy's care. This chapter, now refined, presents a clearer narrative with enhanced descriptions and improved dialogue, ensuring a more engaging and coherent reading experience. Feeling a pang of guilt, Blake announced, "I'm going to see someone." "Who?" came the curious inquiry. "Harry Potter." Outside For Privet Drive, Dumbledore and Blake found themselves seated on a bench. Blake glanced at his right hand, feeling the effects of the illusory body spell that Dumbledore had expertly cast. This spell rendered him completely invisible, to the point where not even he could discern his own body, let alone be noticed by the passing muggles. Additionally, Dumbledore had discreetly cast a spell to deter muggles from approaching, ensuring that no one else attempted to sit on the seemingly vacant bench. From inside 4 Privet Drive, the distinct sound of hammering echoed. Blake recognized it immediately. It was Harry Potter's uncle, Vernon, sealing the mail slot with nails and a hammer. Dumbledore let out a soft sigh. "Such a poor child," he lamented. "We were aware that his muggle relatives might not treat him kindly, but we had no choice but to place him in their care." "He needed to be with his last living blood relative," Dumbledore continued, explaining the necessity of Harry's placement with his aunt. "It's the only way the protective magic surrounding him remains effective." During their journey to Privet Drive, Dumbledore had shared all the details about Harry with Blake. Despite already knowing the story, Blake felt a renewed sense of empathy for the boy. Suddenly, an owl appeared, carrying a letter in its beak, Harry's admission letter to Hogwarts. Hogwarts letters would persistently be sent until they were personally received or explicitly refused. The owl, following its routine, attempted to drop the letter through the mail slot, only to find it sealed shut by Vernon's earlier handiwork. The letter collided with the door and tumbled to the ground, leaving the owl visibly puzzled by its inability to complete its task. "They've gone too far," Blake declared, rising to his feet. "What do you intend to do?" Dumbledore inquired, his curiosity piqued. "If they won't allow the letters to be delivered through conventional means, then I'll find another way," Blake resolved, drawing his wand crafted by Ollivander. Dumbledore watched on, making no move to intervene. Blake wasn't casting an offensive spell, merely a simple replication charm. With a flick of his wand, the single letter on the ground began to multiply, first into 2, then 4, and soon there were hundreds. Like a flock of pigeons taking flight, the envelopes soared from the ground. Blake directed them in a coordinated assault on 4 Privet Drive. The letters infiltrated the house through every conceivable entry point, windows, doors, even the chimney, flooding the interior with a relentless barrage. Shrieks of alarm and roars of frustration erupted from within the house as the deluge of letters continued unabated. Chapter 43. Dumbledore's Strategy Unveiled. "Dumbledore, your spellwork has seen remarkable improvement," Blake observed with a hint of admiration. However, his tone lacked the usual emotional depth, which meant the system did not reward him with a treasure chest notification. "I didn't invest in that spellbook from Diagon Alley for nothing," Blake boasted, his gaze fixed on number 4 Privet Drive, which was now besieged by a flurry of letters, each wailing like a trapped ghost. "These letters will ensure Harry gets the message," Blake remarked as he tucked his wand away. Dumbledore, however, shook his head in disagreement. "I'm afraid Harry might not even get the chance to read them. His family, they're far worse than we initially thought. There's so much Harry doesn't know, hidden from him by the very people who should have been his guardians." "Then we should inform Harry ourselves," Blake suggested. "Together, we can ensure he learns the truth, regardless of his aunt and uncle's objections." Dumbledore offered a gentle smile, shaking his head. "No need, Blake. I've already entrusted this task to someone very close to Harry's parents. He's the one who brought Harry here and is best suited to reveal the truth." Blake's mind immediately conjured the image of Rubus Hagrid. Despite Hagrid's occasional lack of caution, he was undeniably trustworthy. But this led Blake to question, "Professor, if you trust him so implicitly, why are we here?" Dumbledore's smile wavered as he cleared his throat awkwardly. "It's not a matter of trust. I've assigned him a critical task, to retrieve something of immense importance." Blake's thoughts raced. Dumbledore was likely referring to the Philosopher's Stone. Knowing Hagrid's tendency for carelessness, Dumbledore's decision seemed peculiar. Why not retrieve the stone himself or delegate the task to a more reliable faculty member like Professor McGonagall or Professor Flitwick? Dumbledore seemed to read Blake's thoughts. "I do trust Hagrid. My following him is not out of doubt but caution. I'm observing to see who else might show undue interest in Hagrid's mission. I suspect that a certain someone is not as dead as we believed." Blake's eyes lit up with understanding. The Philosopher's Stone was not merely an item of value, it was bait, a a trap for the half-alive Voldemort, who desperately needed it for his resurrection. Dumbledore, unaware of Voldemort's Horcruxes, aimed to lure him out and end him once and for all. But why orchestrate such a complex plan? Was it to prepare Harry Potter, the boy from the prophecy, for his destined confrontation with Voldemort? Only one could survive in the end, and Dumbledore was setting the stage for that ultimate battle. In essence, the prophecy dictated that one must die at the hands of the other. This realization led Blake to recall the events of the original story, where Harry, leveraging his unique bloodline protection magic, was able to cause Professor Quirrell, who was possessed by Voldemort, to burn alive. Blake pondered a scenario. If Voldemort hadn't possessed a Horcrux, his soul bound to an indestructible object, he would have perished alongside Quirrell, perfectly fulfilling the prophecy that the boy born at the end of July would vanquish the Dark Lord. Unfortunately, Voldemort's existence was tethered to his Horcruxes, rendering him immortal and causing Dumbledore's plan to falter. Blake, with a mix of shock and realization, looked at Dumbledore. If his thoughts weren't a product of an overactive imagination, then Dumbledore's strategy was indeed chilling in its implications. Blake's insights were not mere speculation. They were a reflection of Dumbledore's own machinations. Dumbledore, relying solely on his own wisdom and resources, had crafted a plan that, despite its ultimate failure, was not flawed in its intent. Upon noticing Blake's astonished expression, Dumbledore couldn't help but respond with a wry smile. "Have you deduced something once again?" he inquired. "You intended to draw out the one who has not fully perished, to eliminate any future threats, didn't you?" Blake asked directly, cutting to the heart of the matter. Dumbledore looked at Blake, his surprise evident. "You've actually guessed it?" he said, marveling at Blake's insight. "My plan has yet to commence." Dumbledore's eyes then softened, a sense of relief washing over him. "You truly have an extraordinary mind," he remarked. At that moment, Blake received a notification. Shock emotion detected. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a golden treasure chest. This confirmation was all Blake needed. His theories were not the result of overthinking. They were aligned with Dumbledore's own considerations. This venture might have been Dumbledore's way of verifying Voldemort's survival status, understanding his means of survival, and uncovering his hiding place. Dumbledore's strategy involved remaining in the shadows, observing all who interacted with Hagrid, who had recently taken possession of the Philosopher's Stone. The break-in at Gringotts was a pivotal moment, likely alerting Dumbledore to Quirrell's involvement. Dumbledore's decision not to intervene directly with Quirrell's actions stemmed from his belief in the prophecy and his desire for Harry Potter to be the one to defeat Voldemort. Chapter 44. Hagrid, Professor Dumbledore's grandson? Hiss! I was just worried you might find yourself too bored at home alone, Dumbledore explained, his tone laced with praise. That's why I suggested a little outing, but I must admit I didn't expect you to decipher my plan from just a few words. Dumbledore was unaware of Blake's unique perspective, attributing his accurate guesswork to sheer talent. This ability, it's fortunate you didn't end up as a tool for Grindelwald. We must ensure you stay far from his influence. I was merely guessing, Blake responded modestly. Don't downplay your insight, Dumbledore interjected, his eyes twinkling. Since you've figured it out, perhaps you'd like to accompany Hagrid to pick up Harry. Yes, Hagrid is the person I trust implicitly, Dumbledore continued. He's the one I was referring to. Me? Blake pointed to himself, puzzled. What role could I possibly play in this? Dumbledore smiled knowingly. Observe. While I operate from the shadows, you'll be our eyes in the light. Together, we'll have a fuller picture of events. You might also seize this chance to revisit Diagon Alley, Dumbledore suggested, a stern note entering his voice. But steer clear of Nocturne Alley this time. Ahem, understood. Blake remembered his unfinished shopping list and eagerly accepted Dumbledore's proposal. Meeting the legendary savior was an enticing bonus. After all, how many opportunities like this come around? Let's go meet Hagrid, Dumbledore said, glancing at the disarray of 4 Privet Drive before standing. With a gesture, he and Blake vanished, reappearing near Hagrid's location. Hagrid hadn't departed yet. It was still morning, and he was busy preparing a birthday cake for Harry, along with other surprises. After all, He had a crucial role in Dumbledore's plan. Knock, knock! The sound at the door made Hagrid pause, cup in hand. He hurried to answer it. "Oh, Professor Dumbledore," Hagrid greeted, a hint of guilt in his voice. "I was just finishing up a birthday cake for little Harry." "I'm not here to rush you, Hagrid," Dumbledore reassured him with a smile. "May we come in?" Surprised, Hagrid stepped aside, allowing Dumbledore and his unexpected companion entry. Hagrid's eyes widened at the sight of Blake. Having read about Hagrid's half-giant heritage, Blake was nonetheless astounded to meet someone of his stature in person. "Wow!" Blake couldn't help but exclaim, his reaction genuine for a Muggle-born child encountering a half-giant for the first time. Professor Dumbledore, who is this?" Hagrid asked, puzzled. He had expected Dumbledore might bring Harry, but the boy before him bore no resemblance to Lily Potter, instead sharing Dumbledore's blue eyes. "I recently discovered he's a distant relative of mine," Dumbledore revealed, trusting Hagrid with the truth. Due to certain circumstances, he cannot reclaim the Dumbledore name. "So," Blake extended his hand. "My name is Blake Green. It's a pleasure to meet you." "Blake? Oh, sorry, I mistook you for someone else," Hagrid apologized, shaking Blake's hand, which seemed small in his own. "That Blake is a notorious individual. I'm Rubus Hagrid. Just call me Hagrid." The mention of Sirius Blake by Hagrid clarified the misunderstanding, though Blake was amused by Hagrid's initial reaction. Despite the mix-up, the introduction went smoothly, setting the stage for their upcoming adventure. Upon learning that Blake was a member of the Dumbledore family, Hagrid's demeanor shifted noticeably. His enthusiasm for Blake markedly increased. He invited everyone to take a seat and presented them with a plate of rock cakes, a treat so hard it was joked they could double as hammers, only manageable by the likes of Hagrid's half-giant teeth. "Professor Dumbledore, do you have anything else you wish to discuss?" Hagrid inquired. "Oh, there is one more thing," Dumbledore replied, a hint of hesitation in his voice. "I have some matters to attend to over the next few days. Could I trouble you to look after this young man?" He gestured towards Blake, adding, "He's recently come into our world from a Muggle orphanage and is still unfamiliar with many aspects of our society." Blake quickly caught on. "Yes, I've just arrived from the Muggle world. There's so much I don't understand," he said, looking earnestly at Dumbledore. "I wanted to ask Grandpa, but he's been too preoccupied." Dumbledore, who had been sipping tea, nearly choked upon hearing Blake refer to him as Grandpa instead of Professor. He managed to compose himself, but the surprise was evident. After all, Blake was indeed a direct descendant of Dumbledore, making the familial term technically appropriate, whether it be Grandpa or Father. Hagrid, who had initially believed Blake to be a distant relative, was now visibly shocked by the revelation. The thought that Professor Dumbledore had an unknown descendant and the implications it could have on both Dumbledore's and Hogwarts' reputations raced through his mind. The need for discretion was paramount, and yet Dumbledore had confided in him, a fact that moved Hagrid deeply. "Don't worry, Professor Dumbledore. I'm already on my way to pick up Harry. I'll take good care of both of them," Hagrid assured, his voice thick with emotion. "And I promise their identities will remain a secret. You can trust me." The promise of care was sincere, and Hagrid's gaze softened as he looked at Blake, who, in an attempt to partake in the hospitality, bravely bit into a rock cake. The cake's toughness was no match for Blake's determination, and he managed to break off a piece, much to Hagrid's amusement. Dumbledore, observing the exchange, realized Hagrid might have misunderstood the depth of the situation. However, seeing the genuine bond forming, he decided to let the matter rest. After all, some things were better left unsaid, and in this moment, the warmth of newfound connections was all that mattered. Chapter 45. Can you talk to animals? Can it calm down the thunderstorm? Running Gorgon. Crunching sounds filled the air as Blake bit into the hard rock crust, an experience akin to munching on a biscuit. He was well aware of his extraordinary physical fitness, yet the realization that even his teeth had been fortified was a surprise. This hybrid giant found a peculiar joy in consuming rock crust, a preference that seemed to align with his unique constitution. At that moment, Dumbledore had departed, leaving Blake in Hagrid's care. Hagrid instructed Blake to wait at the house while they prepared to fetch Harry. Observing Hagrid's bustling activity, Blake felt a twinge of regret. Hagrid's gratitude had been directed towards Dumbledore, causing her to forget about the treasure chest. After finishing his unconventional snack, Blake stood up and watched Hagrid attempt to bake a cake. The scene unfolding before him was nothing short of a culinary disaster. "I think you should start with honey," Blake suggested, unable to hold back his advice, "and perhaps add more water to avoid dryness. Trust me, you can't go wrong with these adjustments." Following Blake's guidance, Hagrid was astonished by the exquisite cake that materialized before her. "Did I really make this?" "Absolutely. You're the creator of this masterpiece," Blake assured her, as he elegantly decorated the cake with the message, "Happy birthday, Harry." The surprise Hagrid felt triggered a notification for Blake. "Congratulations to the host for obtaining a silver treasure chest." Blake smiled, pleased with the ease of earning treasure chests from Hagrid. The two then spent the day engaged in lively conversation, ranging from culinary delights to magical creatures and even the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid found herself genuinely enjoying Blake's company, sharing common interests in cooking and a love for majestic, albeit ferocious, animals. She was so engrossed in their conversation that she nearly forgot her duties, almost taking Blake on an impromptu adventure to the Forbidden Forest. As night fell, it was time to depart. Blake carefully packed the cake into an exquisite box, reinforcing it with magic to prevent any accidents. "I'm permitted to use magic today, but will still need to travel in a conventional manner," Blake mentioned, hinting at his limited proficiency with phantom transference. Hagrid led Blake to a fireplace, revealing it was temporarily connected for their use and would be sealed after their journey. Blake feigned ignorance of the fireplace's existence, keeping Hagrid in the dark about his prior knowledge of the Dursleys' departure from Privet Drive. Upon arriving at the darkened No. 4 Privet Drive, Hagrid was puzzled but determined to locate Harry. Blake suggested a simpler solution, proposing they let an owl guide them to Harry's current location. Hagrid was skeptical, aware that while owls could find Harry, following one through the sky was impractical. "And I can't just use that motorcycle," Hagrid mumbled, hinting at an alternative mode of transportation. "Perhaps we could ask the owl to fly slower," Blake offered, trying to find a solution. Hagrid was doubtful, explaining the challenges of communicating with the owl and the impracticality of their situation. Despite their magical abilities, fully understanding or controlling the owl's actions seemed beyond their reach. As they deliberated, it became clear that finding Harry would require creativity and perhaps a bit of unconventional magic. Hagrid shook her head, dismissing the idea. Even if owls can grasp some of what wizards say, they can't comprehend complex instructions like flying slower to lead the way. Besides, relying solely on our feet, we're no different from muggles. And it's not like we can hail a muggle taxi and expect the driver to follow an owl without thinking we've lost our minds. "All right, I'll just get the address directly then," Blake said, spreading his hands in resignation. Hagrid looked puzzled for a moment. Then, Blake gently took the owl from her, its feathers drooping. A faint, almost imperceptible green light emanated from his hand, seeping into the owl. Instantly, the bird perked up, full of life and vigor. "Listen," Blake instructed, pressing gently on the owl to calm its newfound excitement. He whispered a few words into its ear, and with that, the owl took off into the sky. After some time, it returned, landing gracefully on Blake's arm and cooing softly. "Got it?" Blake nodded, then handed the owl back to a bewildered Hagrid, who stuffed it back into her pocket. "It told me Harry is on an island. You can actually communicate with it?" Hagrid asked, astounded. Blake just smiled and reassured her. "Don't worry, I wouldn't jeopardize Grandpa's business." Convinced, Hagrid suggested, "Then let's take the Muggle bus." Blake, however, had a different idea. With a flick of his wand, he summoned the night bus. The bus arrived with a bang, its appearance as grand as ever, but after a dizzying ride, Hagrid declared, "I don't want to take the night bus anymore. It's too dizzying." Now standing on the shore, Blake and Hagrid gazed out at a lonely island amidst the waves. Suddenly, thunder boomed overhead, and rain began to pour down once again. "What terrible weather!" Hagrid exclaimed, opening her coat to shield Blake from the rain. "Is Harry really on that island?" she asked. Yes, but this rain is quite bothersome, Blake replied, looking up at the stormy sky. With a determined look, Blake raised his wand once more. What are you doing? Hagrid asked, puzzled. With a crack, a bolt of lightning shot from Blake's wand into the rain clouds. Moments later, the thunder quieted and the clouds began to dissipate. It wasn't just a display of power. Blake had mastered the weather incantation to a remarkable degree, allowing him to clear the storm. To Hagrid, it seemed nothing short of miraculous. Gorgon, running wild, she exclaimed, utterly amazed by Blake's ability to control the weather. Their path to the island now clear, Blake's mastery of magic had not only impressed Hagrid, but also paved the way for their next steps in finding Harry. Chapter 46, An Unexpected Transformation and a Surprising Arrival. Hagrid took a moment to gather herself, still reeling from the revelation. As expected of a child from the Dumbledore family, she muttered under her breath. Blake, trying to downplay his abilities, responded modestly. It's not that significant. I just have a few tricks up my sleeve. If you're really that skilled, why not teach me? Hagrid inquired, half-jokingly. I might consider it when it's raining hard enough to drown my cabbages, Blake teased, knowing full well the improbability of such an event. Hagrid quickly changed the subject. Let's not dwell on that. We need to figure out how to get to Harry. Blake was curious about Hagrid's mode of transportation. In the original story, Hagrid had flown directly to Harry's location. Given Hagrid's considerable size, Blake wondered how she intended to fly. I'll be flying there, Hagrid confirmed, seeing the curiosity in Blake's eyes. You should wait here. Once I've retrieved Harry, we'll leave together. Why don't we go together? Blake asked, puzzled. Hagrid hesitated before admitting, truthfully, I can barely manage the flight by myself. Adding another person would make it dangerously difficult. As she spoke, Hagrid rummaged through her seemingly enchanted pocket, which Blake suspected could hold an endless amount of items. After a moment, she pulled out a broomstick, much to Blake's surprise. This is a specially modified broom. It's designed for short glides and, unfortunately, can't support additional weight. That's why I can't bring you along, Hagrid explained, mounting the broom with a sense of determination. The broom creaked under Hagrid's weight, prompting Blake to insist, It's okay. I'll find my own way there. Don't worry about me. Hagrid looked concerned, but eventually relented, stepping off the ground. The broom squeaked painfully as it lifted off, carrying Hagrid at a painfully slow pace toward the island. Blake watched, grateful that he had quelled the thunderstorm earlier, or Hagrid's journey would have been even more perilous. Upon Hagrid's arrival at the island, she dismounted the broom, which trembled from the ordeal, and stuffed it back into her pocket. Her attention then turned to the dilapidated house at the center of the island. Suddenly, a large bird landed beside Hagrid, transforming into Blake. Hagrid's jaw dropped in shock. Are you an animagus? She asked, astounded. Blake feigned ignorance. What's an animagus? Your ability to transform. Hagrid began, trying to comprehend what she had just witnessed. I woke up with this skill one day. I don't really understand it myself, Blake explained, not overly concerned about revealing his abilities. After all, being a unique life form created in a laboratory came with its own set of extraordinary skills. Their conversation was interrupted by a loud knocking on the door of the wooden house, which seemed on the verge of collapse. A voice from inside shouted, Who's there? I have a gun. Hagrid gave Blake a knowing look before gently pushing the door open with a slight nudge, causing it to fall off its hinges. Could we trouble you for a cup of hot tea? It's been a long journey, Hagrid said as she squeezed through the doorway, with Blake following closely behind. Inside, they were greeted by the sight of a short, middle-aged man with a beard, who looked as surprised to see them as they were determined to make their unexpected visit worthwhile. Holding a rifle in his hand, a man aimed it at Hagrid, while a chubby boy and a woman with a sharp chin and a long neck took cover behind him. Unperturbed, Hagrid made his way to the sofa and took a seat. His gaze then fell upon a green-eyed boy sitting on the ground next to him, who looked back in surprise. This is Harry, Hagrid introduced with a warm smile. Last I saw you, you were just a little kid. Oh, you bear such a strong resemblance to your father, but your eyes are your mother's. Hagrid's attention shifted back to Blake, noting the similarity between in Blake's eyes and Dumbledore's. Aunt Finon, her voice sharp, demanded, "I want you to leave this place immediately. Sir, this is trespassing on private property." "Oh, shut up, you big idiot," Hagrid retorted, visibly annoyed. She moved to snatch the rifle, only to find it soaring into the air by itself before landing gracefully in Blake's hands. With a casual twist, Blake bent the barrel as if it were made of rubber, leaving everyone in shock at the display of his strength. Ding! Detected 5 emotions of shock. Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining 3 bronze treasure chests, 1 silver treasure chest, and 1 gold treasure chest. The onlookers were astounded. Blake, somewhat embarrassed by the unintended show of strength, discarded the now useless gun. "Oh, Blake, your strength rivals mine," Hagrid remarked, impressed. Following this incident, the narrative returned to the original plot. Hagrid enlightened Harry about his heritage, expressing dismay at Harry's ignorance and disdain for the treatment he received from Uncle Finon's family. Throughout this exchange, Blake remained silent, focusing instead on making a fire and preparing tea. He then took out some food he had prepared earlier from Hagrid's pocket and began to cook. Even the simple act of grilling sausages seemed to elevate the dish to an extraordinary level of deliciousness, much to Harry's delight, who had never tasted anything quite so savory. As Harry savored the meal, he pondered over his newfound knowledge of the wizarding world and the mysterious boy who had barely spoken a word. Are all wizards this powerful? Then why does Dudley always get the better of me? He wondered. Just as Blake was about to drift off to sleep, Uncle Finon erupted in anger, refusing to pay for Harry's magical education. Hagrid, furious, reached for her umbrella, but Blake was quicker. With a swift motion, he drew his wand, its silver light gleaming menacingly. "Never, in my presence, insult Albus Dumbledore," he declared, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Chapter 47, A New Protector. A dazzling bolt of electricity shot from Blake's wand, striking Dudley with precision. Amidst the screams of Harry's Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia, Dudley was transformed into a pig. Harry, who had been leisurely enjoying grilled sausages on the sofa, watched the scene unfold with his emerald green eyes wide in astonishment. At that moment, a single emotion surged through his heart, sheer, unadulterated satisfaction. Ding! 3 emotions of fear have been detected, announced an invisible system, followed by, "Congratulations to the host for obtaining 3 bronze treasure chests." Shortly after, it added, "2 emotions of relief and refreshment have been detected. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 2 silver treasure chests." Blake, hearing the system's prompts, sheathed his wand with a satisfied smirk. The display of power had effectively silenced Uncle Vernon and his family, who no longer dared to oppose Blake and Hagrid. As Hagrid resumed his discussion with Harry about the wizarding world, Blake casually observed from the sidelines, secretly amused by the fear he instilled in the Dursleys, which even earned him additional treasure chests. Blake couldn't help but find the fear he inspired oddly gratifying, attributing this unsettling pleasure to the influence of Grindelwald's bloodline. "I'm supposed to be the good guy here," he mused to himself. The following morning, Blake lifted the transformation spell from Dudley, issuing a stern warning to the Dursleys. "From today onwards, Harry Potter is under my protection. Do you understand?" The family nodded, visibly shaken by the young wizard's formidable presence. As Hagrid prepared to depart with Harry, unable to use magic, he resorted to rowing the boat back. Blake was the last to board, catching Harry's look of admiration. "Ahem, don't look at me like that, Harry. You're not a girl," Blake joked, adding, "If you ever get bullied again, just say my name. I'm your boss now, and I'll definitely protect you." He clapped Harry on the shoulder with a reassuring grin. Are all young wizards in the wizarding world as powerful as you?" Harry asked, impressed. "No, I'm actually the least powerful," Blake replied with a smirk, causing Harry to gasp in disbelief. "Don't mind his nonsense, Harry. Who else in the wizarding world could match his power?" Hagrid interjected, slightly annoyed at being interrupted during his treasure chest looting spree. Blake and Harry quickly grew familiar with each other, but Blake's visit wasn't solely for Harry's sake. He had another agenda, to meet with Dumbledore, and from the shadows keep an eye on those who would approach Harry. Despite already knowing the identity of the potential threat, Blake understood the importance of maintaining appearances. Their time in Diagon Alley was productive, and Blake even encountered Professor Quirrell, who was easily recognizable by his lisp, trembling demeanor, and garlic scent. However, Blake was slightly disappointed not to meet Cassandra and others, missing out on additional treasure chests. In the evening, Blake received a letter from Dumbledore, signaling it was time to return. After bidding farewell to Hagrid and Harry, Blake discreetly made his way to a guest room in the leaky cauldron, where Professor Dumbledore awaited him. Upon entering, Dumbledore poured Blake a cup of black tea with sugar, then addressed him with a sigh. "You were a bit impulsive, Blake." Blake knew the comment referred to his rash decision to transform Dudley into a pig. "Yes, but he insulted you," Blake defended, though he understood the gravity of his actions. "I'm touched by your support, but we cannot attack Muggles," Dumbledore explained, sharing the unfortunate fate of Blake's father, who was imprisoned in Azkaban for attacking Muggles and died there. "Why? If we're bullied by Muggles, must we simply endure it?" Blake challenged, struggling with the concept. Dumbledore sighed. "It's also to protect innocent Muggles." He understood Blake's frustration, acknowledging his own aggressive response to similar situations in the past, influenced by his dealings with Grindelwald. "Let's not dwell on this," Dumbledore suggested, steering the conversation away from the contentious topic. Dumbledore shifted the conversation, seeking Blake's insights after a day of observation. "Who do you find most suspicious?" he inquired. Without a moment's hesitation, Blake responded, "Professor Quirrell. He's the most suspicious." Intrigued, Dumbledore asked, "Why do you think so?" Blake explained, "I learned from Hagrid that Quirrell was once known for his intelligence and outstanding academic performance. However, his personality seems to have undergone a drastic change. I find it hard to believe that an encounter with a vampire and an old witch could cause such a transformation. It's more plausible that he faced something far more terrifying than a vampire." Dumbledore's eyes sparkled with admiration. "You've made a keen observation, Blake. Indeed, there is something amiss with Quirrell." He then shared a recent incident. "Just today, while you were out shopping, he attempted to break into Gringotts." After their discussion, Blake returned to Godric Valley, and Dumbledore hurried off once again. Alone in his room, Blake began to organize the treasure chests he had accumulated throughout the day. He recalled that 10 bronze treasure chests could be combined into one silver chest, 10 silver chests into a gold one, and 10 gold chests into a diamond chest. Thus, he combined the bronze chests he had acquired from Uncle Finon's family, resulting in 2 silver chests. This left him with 8 silver chests and 3 gold chests in total. Considering the exclusive experience points he had earned that day and the silver chests he now possessed, Blake decided to save up the silver chests until he could combine them into gold ones. However, he couldn't resist the temptation to open the 3 gold chests he already had. Upon opening them, he was greeted with exciting rewards. Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining a random magical animal egg, followed by Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining a mutated whomping willow seed. And finally, Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining a supreme grade proficiency in the Guardian spell. These discoveries filled Blake with a sense of anticipation and excitement for the adventures that lay ahead. Chapter 48. Hermione, Cassandra. Who is she? Fantastic, Blake exclaimed, marveling at the treasures he had acquired. The humping willow and the mutated devil's snare from the silver treasure chest were impressive, but the humping willow from the gold treasure chest was even more extraordinary. And then there was the magical animal egg, whose potential was boundless. According to the system, it could hatch anything from a mundane dandelion to a majestic phoenix, or even a legendary mythical beast. The outcome was entirely up to chance. Blake hesitated, deciding to postpone hatching the egg. He planned to consult Snape about possibly obtaining some blessing potions to increase his chances of a favorable outcome. As for the Guardian Charm, it was a special item dropped by the Savior. "Summon the Guardian Charm," Blake commanded, tapping his wand. A majestic white phoenix materialized, its presence undeniable. "I have to see this for myself. It's clear whose child I am," Blake thought, a sense of pride swelling within him. Despite Dumbledore's busy schedule, Blake found life in Godric's Valley to be fulfilling. Time passed quietly, and one day, Blake received his long-awaited admission letter, along with numerous other letters containing birthday gifts. Dumbledore had discreetly informed Blake's friends of his birthday, promising them it would be a surprise for Blake. "This is why I haven't told you your birthday until now. I hope you enjoy the surprise," Dumbledore said, entering with a birthday cake. Despite Blake's usually composed demeanor, he couldn't help but be touched by the gesture. While Baker sliced the cake, Blake opened his gifts. Hermione had given him a pen, acknowledging his preference over traditional quills. Cassandra surprised him with a seed, the nature of which Blake couldn't identify. Her letter playfully challenged him to guess its type, leaving Blake both intrigued and impressed by her mysterious gift. Lady Marian, having learned of the wizarding world through Dumbledore, sent Blake a handmade scarf. Pinello gifted him a magic spell book, a choice befitting her Ravenclaw roots. Mr. Ollivander contributed a new manuscript, and Hannah shared a recipe she had developed. Hagrid's gift was the most astonishing, a massive bundle of unicorn tail hair which he had borrowed from his friends in the Forbidden Forest. Blake was speechless, managing to maintain his composure with great effort. Harry sent a box of candy from Diagon Alley, promising a more substantial gift later. The day ended late at night, with Dumbledore retiring to rest. Before Blake returned to his room, Baker handed him a notebook, a secret gift from the old master. Blake, aware of his lineage as Grindelwald's descendant, accepted the notebook with curiosity. Upon opening it, a message appeared. "Hello, Blake. This is the first time I'm talking to you. My name is Grindelwald. If you have questions that are inconvenient to ask Dumbledore, you can write them here. I'll see and reply immediately. Also, keep this notebook hidden from Dumbledore." Blake's pupils dilated in shock at the revelation, his mind racing with the implications of this secret communication. As he processed this unexpected turn of events, the sound of a taxi door snapping shut echoed in the background, marking the end of an extraordinary day. Blake stood alone, clutching a small suitcase at the entrance of King's Cross Station. It was September 1st, a day he had been eagerly anticipating. His destination was Platform 9 3/4, a magical gateway hidden behind a seemingly ordinary wall. Gathering his courage, Blake made his way towards the platform, his heart racing with excitement. As he approached, a familiar figure caught his eye. Hermione was pacing anxiously between platforms 9 and 10, her brow furrowed in concentration. Seizing the opportunity for a reunion, Blake greeted her warmly. "Good day, Hermione. It's been a while." Hermione, taken aback, replied, "Oh, Blake, hello. Yes, it has. Seems like you're trying to find Platform 9 3/4. It's quite simple, actually. All you need to do is—" "Wait! I'll figure it out on my own. I'm sure I can find it," Hermione interjected, her pride preventing her from accepting help too quickly. She resumed her incantations, determined to discover the entrance by herself. Blake was about to playfully tease her further when an unmistakably haughty voice interrupted the moment. "Ha! Is there actually someone here who doesn't know how to find Platform 9 3/4? Hermione's expression darkened instantly. Blake turned to find Cassandra, adorned in a striking green dress, standing behind him with a smirk. "Hello, Cassandra," Blake greeted, his tone polite yet firm. "But please, refrain from making such comments about my friend. It's perfectly normal for those of us not from wizarding families to be unfamiliar with the platform's location." No sooner had Blake finished his defense than both girls questioned him in unison, their surprise evident. "You know her?" The air hung heavy with tension for a brief moment before they simultaneously demanded, "Who is she?" The sudden silence that followed was charged with curiosity and a hint of rivalry, as both Hermione and Cassandra awaited Blake's explanation. The encounter at King's Cross Station had taken an unexpected turn, setting the stage for a day full of surprises and revelations. Chapter 49. Malfoy. What? My goddess is only cold towards me? A painful realization. Please subscribe. Blake introduced the two women with a calm demeanor, seemingly oblivious to the tension between them. "This is Cassandra Worley, and this is Hermione Granger. You're both my friends." Cassandra shot Blake a glare before storming through the barrier to Platform 9 3/4. She couldn't pinpoint the exact reason for her anger, but seeing Blake converse and smile with Hermione had sparked an intense jealousy within her. Her irritation manifested in a sharp, venomous retort. "Bastard! He actually defended that idiotic girl in front of me." Meanwhile, Hermione watched Cassandra disappear into the platform, feeling a mix of confusion and indignation. She had hoped to discover the entrance to platform 9 3/4 on her own, but now her thoughts were clouded with frustration. "How can you be friends with someone so hurtful?" Hermione exclaimed, unable to hide her disdain for Cassandra's harsh words. Blake responded with a serene tone. "People are diverse, Hermione. It's important not to judge someone based on first impressions alone." Hermione, still fuming, muttered under her breath about Blake's naivety. As they crossed the barrier, the bustling scene of the Hogwarts Express and its passengers unfolded before them. The platform was alive with the chatter of families, the cries of various pets, and the excitement of students eager to begin their journey. Blake scanned the crowd but saw no sign of Cassandra. "Let's go," he said, leading the way to the train. Along the way, they encountered a young boy lamenting the loss of his toad to his grandmother, and a group of children marveling at a boy's pet spider. Reaching the train, Blake noticed Hermione struggling with her heavy suitcase, filled to the brim with books. Without hesitation, he effortlessly lifted it with one hand and boarded the train, leaving Hermione in awe of his strength. "Why are you so strong?" she asked, genuinely curious. "I was born with great strength," Blake replied, keeping the details of his abilities vague. Finding a compartment proved challenging, as most were already occupied. Eventually, they approached a carriage at the back of the train and found Cassandra sitting alone inside. Blake inquired if there was room for them, to which Cassandra hastily replied that the compartment was full and others would return soon. As Blake began to close the door, resigning themselves to search for another spot, Cassandra suddenly changed her mind. "Wait," she called out, then quickly corrected herself, claiming there was indeed space for them. Despite her earlier claim of it being full, she now insisted they had misunderstood her. Blake and Hermione exchanged puzzled looks, but accepted the invitation, grateful for a place to sit. As they settled in, the dynamics within the compartment hinted at an intricate web of relationships and emotions, setting the stage for an intriguing journey to Hogwarts. Seeing Hermione, Cassandra couldn't fathom why she felt a surge of irritation. She had assumed that after her rejection, Blake and Hermione would seek an empty carriage elsewhere. Yet, here they were, choosing to stay in the same carriage as her, which only fueled her anger further. She resolved to remain in the carriage, determined not to be driven away. Blake, oblivious to Cassandra's fluctuating emotions, casually picked up his suitcase and entered the carriage, setting it down with ease. Hermione hesitated at the doorway, the thought of sharing the carriage with Cassandra making her consider standing for the entire journey to Hogwarts. However, seeing Blake enter without a second thought changed her mind. She couldn't bear the idea of leaving Blake alone with Cassandra, so she stepped in decisively. Cassandra pretended not to notice Hermione's entrance, turning her head away indifferently. Blake, settling into his seat, placed his suitcase on the table before offering, "Do you want a Coke?" with a friendly smile, pulling out a large can from his suitcase. "No, that's not good for my teeth," Hermione declined, shaking her head. Cassandra caught a glimpse of Hermione's front teeth and couldn't help but let out a chuckle, which earned her a sharp glare from Hermione. "It's okay, I have other things here," Blake said, unfazed, as he began to take out an assortment of drinks and snacks from his suitcase. The collection included items from both the Muggle and Wizarding worlds, featuring a variety of flavors. "How can you fit so many things in your suitcase?" Hermione asked, her curiosity piqued by the seemingly impossible capacity of Blake's small suitcase. "Haven't you heard of the traceless stretch spell?" Cassandra interjected with a sneer, her words laced with condescension. Hermione shot Cassandra another angry look. Her limited exposure to the Wizarding world was a sore point, and Cassandra's remark only highlighted her feeling of inadequacy. As the train's whistle blew, signaling the imminent departure, the scene outside the carriage window became one of hurried farewells. Parents quickly disembarked, while the young wizards waved goodbye to their families. Blake watched quietly, a hint of melancholy in his eyes. Hermione, misinterpreting his expression as sadness from not having a family to see him off, didn't realize that Dumbledore had adopted him. "I want to ask you a question about transfiguration," Hermione said, hoping to distract Blake from his thoughts. Cassandra, seizing the opportunity, added, "I also have a question. The seed I gave you before, have you discovered what type it is?" Blake shook his head. "I haven't identified it yet, but I've planted it, and it's already sprouting. Trust me, I'll figure it out soon." His smile was confident, betraying none of the marvels of the top-grade plant collection bag he possessed, which could accelerate the growth of even the most stubborn seeds. Cassandra was taken aback. You managed to grow it? And it sprouted?" Her surprise was genuine, as even her parents, who had received the seed from a friend as a rare specimen, had failed to cultivate it. Blake, catching on to her astonishment, teased, "Don't tell me you gave me a seed that was impossible to grow?" Cassandra, feeling a mix of guilt and relief, replied, "No, at least now we know it's not a bad seed." Blake inwardly smirked, knowing well that the advanced plant collection bag awarded by the system could nurture any seed to growth, challenging Cassandra's initial skepticism. The nurturing of rare seeds back to life was no small feat, and Blake had managed to do just that with the support of his collection bag. It had taken a considerable amount of time for the seed to germinate, a fact that both surprised and delighted Cassandra. "Tsk, naughty," she exclaimed, her cheeks flushing with a hint of embarrassment. Despite her initial reluctance, Cassandra's curiosity about the seedling overcame her. After all, she had sent Blake many rare seeds, and this little trick of his didn't bother her in the slightest. "Then, may I see the seedling of that plant?" Cassandra inquired after a moment, her interest in herbology piqued by the news that a seed her parents had failed to grow had sprouted under Blake's care. "Of course," Blake responded warmly. He reached into his suitcase once more, rummaging around before carefully extracting a small flower pot. He placed it on the table in the carriage, revealing a fiery red seedling stretching its branches towards the light. "Ah, it's grown quite a bit," Blake observed with satisfaction. His ability as a great druid had played a significant role in the plant's growth, alongside the nurturing environment of the collection bag. Cassandra stared at Blake in astonishment. How can you carry plants with you?" she asked, bewildered. She had expected Blake to show her a photograph, or perhaps invite her to see the plant in the future, not carry it with him. The concept of a plant growing in a bag was beyond her comprehension, especially since her own attempts to grow it in darkness had failed. "It's beautiful," Cassandra murmured, her gaze fixed on the seedling, her earlier frustration forgotten in her admiration of the plant. Meanwhile, Blake turned his attention to Hermione, who had questions about transfiguration. Their peaceful moment was soon interrupted by a knock on the carriage door, followed by the entrance of Draco Malfoy, accompanied by Gower. Malfoy, a member of a noble pureblood family, had been advised by his father, Lucius Malfoy, to pursue Cassandra Whirl due to her beauty and noble bloodline, which made her a suitable match for the Malfoy name. Upon entering the carriage and seeing Blake, Cassandra, and Hermione together, Malfoy's jealousy surged. The sight of Cassandra, who had always maintained a cold and aloof demeanor, now looking at Blake with surprise and admiration, shattered Malfoy's image of her as an unattainable ice goddess. You, Malfoy stammered, his jealousy palpable. "Ding! Extreme jealousy detected," a voice announced, followed by, "Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining a gold treasure chest." Blake, who had been explaining advanced shapeshifting to Hermione and Cassandra, looked up to see who had entered. Recognizing the trio of Draco Malfoy and his companions, Blake's expression remained composed, despite Malfoy's evident discomfort and jealousy. The dynamics in the carriage had shifted dramatically, setting the stage for an interesting encounter. Draco Malfoy stood before Cassandra, flanked by his ever-present and notably less astute companions, Vincent Crabbe and Gregory Goyle. At this moment, his gaze was fixed on Cassandra, filled with a mixture of disbelief and something else she couldn't quite place. "Malfoy?" Cassandra arched an elegant eyebrow, her tone laced with a mix of curiosity and annoyance. "What brings you here?" Malfoy seemed momentarily lost for words, his usual bravado faltering. I He struggled, the internal battle evident as he recalled his father's stern directives. Despite the jealousy gnawing at him, he managed to compose himself, albeit barely. "Miss Worley, I came to extend an invitation to join us in our carriage," he said, his voice strained in an attempt at civility. "I believe you would benefit from associating with pure-blood wizards of our stature rather than—" His voice trailed off as his gaze shifted disdainfully towards Blake, whose simple attire belied his complexity, and Hermione, whose Muggle heritage was unmistakable. Cassandra had long found Draco Malfoy to be a thorn in her side. His presence was an unwelcome constant, his attempts to draw her attention ranging from mildly irritating to downright infuriating. Even before their return to Hogwarts, Malfoy had made it a point to visit the Worley family estate, each visit more annoying than the last. She had hoped to escape his pestering by frequenting Diagon Alley, only to find herself in the company of Blake, an encounter that had left Malfoy with more than just a bruised ego. Prideful to her core, Cassandra could not tolerate Malfoy's presumptuous tone. Her patience snapped, and with it, her response was swift and sharp. "I don't need you, or anyone else for that matter, to dictate who I should befriend," she retorted, her voice cold and unwavering. "I trust my own judgment perfectly well, so I suggest you return to your carriage and spare me any further annoyance." Her words were a clear dismissal, leaving no room for argument. Malfoy, taken aback by her fierce independence, could only retreat, his plans to sway her to his side thwarted by her resolute stance. Chapter 50. A devilish cycle of healing and harm. In Cassandra's perspective, there was a certain individual who seemed to spend his days boasting about his own greatness. Yet, in reality, he was nothing more than a braggart with no substance. She couldn't fathom why such a person felt entitled to criticize her choice of friends. Even Blake, whose talents far surpassed her own in every aspect, didn't bother her as much. To her, everything was relative. Despite Blake's formidable abilities, it was his humility that truly set him apart. In her eyes, Blake embodied the noble qualities of a pure-blooded wizard, powerful yet elegant, never resorting to boastfulness. Malfoy, on the other hand, felt deeply insulted by Cassandra's words. He could have tolerated her arrogance and cold demeanor if it were directed equally at everyone. But it wasn't. She reserved that attitude solely for him. Why did Cassandra regard Blake with such admiration, while he, Malfoy, was met with disdain? His pride wounded, Malfoy could hardly bear it. "You stand up!" Malfoy demanded, pointing at Blake. The system in Blake's mind chimed in. "Extreme jealousy and hatred have been detected. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a gold treasure chest." Blake, leaning back with his arms draped over the back of his chair, appeared nonchalant. This posture might have seemed merely arrogant under different circumstances. However, with Hermione and Cassandra seated on either side of him, it looked as though he was about to embrace them both. Hermione might not have minded, but Cassandra's lack of resistance, her failure to reject this gesture, shattered Malfoy's heart. The system announced another reward for Blake, further fueling Malfoy's rage. To Malfoy, Blake's smile seemed nothing short of a taunt. "Get up," Malfoy insisted. "I want Cassandra to see the true colors of her friends." Blake remained seated, his tone indifferent. "If I stood up just because you told me to, wouldn't that be humiliating?" In a fit of anger, Malfoy called on Crabbe and Goyle to take action. Cassandra, outraged, couldn't believe Malfoy would stoop so low as to initiate a fight in her carriage. This was her space, and Blake was her guest. How could she stand by and allow Malfoy to attack him? Before Cassandra could fully draw her wand, Blake was already in motion. With astonishing speed, he subdued Crabbe and Goyle, pressing their heads against the table with such force that it left indentations. Hermione, witnessing the scene, realized the severity of Blake's actions. Crabbe and Goyle appeared severely injured, if not worse. Malfoy, too, was taken aback by Blake's display of strength, fearing the worst. "You killed them?" Malfoy exclaimed. "You'll be thrown into Azkaban." Cassandra was equally shocked, not expecting Blake to act so aggressively. However, Blake reassured them. "Don't jump to conclusions. Look carefully. They're not hurt at all. How could I be thrown into Azkaban for this?" Malfoy and Cassandra observed Crabbe and Goyle more closely. Despite the initial appearance of blood and injury, the two were, in fact, unharmed. The situation, though tense, had not escalated to a point of no return, thanks to Blake's control and the peculiar cycle of harm and healing he seemed to command. Everything vanished, the blood, the dent on the table, all traces of the recent chaos. Gower, in his bewilderment, even scratched his head, unable to comprehend the sudden change. It was as if the painful events that had just unfolded were nothing but an illusion. Yet the memory of the pain lingered vividly in his mind. What's happening? Malfoy, his voice laced with terror, rubbed his eyes. What kind of magic did you use on me? Magic? On you? Blake responded, his tone suggesting no such thing had occurred. In the next moment, Gower and Crabbe found themselves once again under Blake's control, their faces smeared with blood. However, when Malfoy attempted to retaliate with a curse, Blake intervened, pulling the two up. Miraculously, the wounds on Crabbe and Gower's foreheads, along with the damage on the table, vanished without a trace. What's going on? Malfoy exclaimed, his confusion mounting. Ding! Detected an emotion of panic and confusion, a voice announced, followed by, Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining a silver treasure chest. Malfoy, bewildered, found himself handing Blake another treasure chest. As for Gower and Crabbe, they were barely conscious, having been subjected to Blake's relentless assault, only to be healed repeatedly. Their ability to process emotions was numbed by shock. Ding! The target's treasure chest drop today has reached the upper limit, the voice declared, signaling that Malfoy would not yield any more treasure chests that day. With that, Blake ceased his torment, leaving Crabbe and Gower on the ground, their injuries and concussions mysteriously healed. Yet the memory of their pain was indelibly etched in their minds. As they regained their senses and gazed at Blake, they saw not a fellow student, but a demon. Ding! 2 extremely frightened emotions have been detected, the voice announced, rewarding Blake with 2 bronze treasure chests. Why are these 2 so weak? Blake mused, surprised by the ease with which he had instilled terror in them. He then turned his attention to Malfoy, who was visibly shaken by the ordeal. The fear had erased any trace of jealousy from Malfoy's heart, leaving only dread. If not for the lingering blood on Blake's hand, Malfoy might have convinced himself it was all an illusion. As Blake approached, Malfoy retreated until he was cornered against the door with no escape. Do you want to know why? Blake asked softly, closing the distance between them. I. Malfoy stuttered, his fear rendering him incapable of forming a coherent response. You, don't hurt me, he pleaded. My father is the school director. If you hurt me, you'll be expelled. Blake smiled, unfazed. Oh, is that so? And on what grounds would you have me expelled? Because I hit you? But there are no injuries on your bodies. You have no evidence. Malfoy was at a loss for words, his panic evident. Blake casually wiped the blood from his hand onto his collar, his gesture nonchalant. So, don't mess with me, otherwise I'll beat you, heal you, and then beat you again. I promise, under my healing spell, not a trace of your wounds will remain. Malfoy was petrified. The thought of being subjected to such a cycle of violence and healing was too much to bear. Blake's demeanor, cold and indifferent, exuded a terrifying aura. Unable to withstand the pressure, Malfoy fled the carriage in a panic, followed closely by Crabbe and Gower. Blake waved nonchalantly as they departed. Goodbye. You're welcome to come again next time, he called out, then closed the door. Turning around, Blake was met with 2 very different reactions. Can you really heal them immediately after injuring them? Cassandra inquired, her tone a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Indeed, I've been quite productive at home these days, Blake began, his voice tinged with a hint of pride. Given my future plans to raise large animals and cultivate various dangerous plants, injuries are inevitable. Thus, mastering healing spells was essential. Fortunately, the great druid's talent significantly enhances the efficacy of such spells, accelerating my learning process. Initially, I had to recite the incantation, heal, as before. However, I quickly progressed to casting spells silently and without a wand, with increasingly potent effects. Remarkably, I achieved this mastery in just half a month, relying solely on my own abilities rather than the system. This marks the first spell I've mastered independently, is advancing from basic to intermediate mastery. Cassandra was dumbfounded. You've only been practicing these incantations for less than a month, and you've already surpassed the healing capabilities of Baishan's spells? That's incredible. Meanwhile, Hermione was fraught with worry. Did you hear about his father being a School board member? What are we going to do? You could be expelled. Cassandra, usually sharp-tongued, responded with uncharacteristic calmness. No, Malfoy might seek revenge on others, but not on Blake. She chuckled to herself, recalling a piece of news her father had shared. Dumbledore had adopted a boy, and considering his evident concern for Blake and Diagon Alley, it wasn't hard to deduce who the adoptee was. With Dumbledore's support, even concrete evidence of Blake's wrongdoing wouldn't be enough for Lucius Malfoy to lay a finger on him. And as for extracting memories as evidence, Dumbledore himself is the master of that domain. It's ludicrous to think he'd expel Blake. Hermione, unaware of these details, remained anxious. Cassandra's laughter caught her attention, hinting at another strategy to undermine their adversary. Dumbledore's relationship with him? He didn't tell you? Hermione's gaze turned accusatory towards Blake. Even she knows about it, and you didn't tell me? I've been so worried. Blake, caught off guard by Cassandra's knowledge, asked, You know? But how? I don't remember sharing that with you. Now that you're aware, please keep it a secret. Although Professor Dumbledore has indeed adopted me, he wishes to keep it under wraps. Hermione was stunned. You were adopted by Professor Dumbledore? When did this happen? Realizing her outburst, she quickly covered her mouth. Blake calmly responded, not long after the incident with the hidden monster. Cassandra, frustrated that her attempt to unsettle Blake had failed, glared at him. Meanwhile, Blake reveled in the situation, his system rewarding him with 2 silver treasure chests for detecting emotions of shock and anger. Sitting back contentedly, Blake mused on the efficiency of collecting treasure chests with the 2 of them around. In just half a day, he had amassed a significant haul. As the train journey continued, nearing noon, a middle-aged witch with a cart full of snacks knocked on their carriage door. Dear, would you like anything? Blake's eyes lit up. Of course. Despite having brought plenty of snacks, most were from the Muggle world. He couldn't pass up the chance to indulge in Wizarding World delicacies, especially desserts, which he had a particular fondness for. After paying 15 silver sickles and 8 bronze nuts, Blake returned with an assortment of snacks. Among them were flavored beans, boasting-worthy super bubblegum, and chocolate frogs. Eat up, Blake announced, placing the items on the table before eagerly opening a cauldron cake. Hermione, not often indulging in snacks from the Wizarding World, didn't hesitate to pick up a chocolate frog. Meanwhile, Cassandra cautiously chose a piece of pumpkin pie. Just then, a commotion erupted outside, accompanied by cries and exclamations. No, Raffles! Run, Raffles! Oh God, what a massive spider! But how did it get so big? Lee Jordan, control your spider. Oh, damn it! Fred, George, you two are insufferable. Oh, has it caught the poor toad? Raffles is gone. The sudden outburst of panic and confusion drew their attention away from the snacks. The mention of a giant spider and the chaos it was causing sparked a mixture of curiosity and concern among them. The situation outside seemed to escalate quickly, with various students shouting and blaming each other for the chaos unfolding. Chapter 51. Acromantula Encounter and the Unconventional Use of a Wand. Blake's mind suddenly flashed back to the round-faced boy he had met on the train, Neville Longbottom. At this point in time, Neville was still far from realizing his potential as a swordmaster, appearing more as a clumsy young boy. The commotion outside the carriage quickly drew Blake's attention, hinting that Neville's toad had somehow gotten into trouble, likely involving a spider that Lee Jordan had previously boxed up. Rising to investigate, Blake opened the carriage door to find several young wizards peeking curiously from their compartments. In the aisle, Neville lay sprawled, staring in despair at a large spider in the distance. This spider, the size of a basketball, was frantically spinning its web, dragging something towards it with its thick chelicerae clacking menacingly. Tied up in the spider's silk was a toad, looking utterly helpless. Blake was taken aback. The spider he had glimpsed before boarding the train hadn't seemed nearly this large. Could it have grown? Or was this a different, far more dangerous creature? Upon closer inspection, and drawing upon his basic knowledge of magical creatures, Blake realized his mistake. This was no harmless acromantula substitute, but a genuine 8-eyed giant spider, akin to the ones Hagrid was fond of during his school days. Unlike the relatively docile substitute spider, this creature posed a real threat, capable of attacking humans. Determined to act, Blake couldn't stand by and watch Neville's toad become spider food. He dashed forward, drawing his mithril wand, despite the warnings from his peers that curses seemed ineffective against the creature. Indeed, the spells cast by the young wizards barely seemed to bother the giant spider, their magic too weak to make an impact. In a surprising turn, Blake didn't attempt a spell as everyone expected. Instead, with a swift motion, he leaped and brought his wand down hard on the spider. The metallic clang of the impact echoed through the carriage, and the spider ceased its movements, all 8 eyes turning white before it collapsed. The carriage fell silent, the student stunned by Blake's unconventional tactic. He had used his wand not as a magical instrument, but as a blunt weapon to physically subdue the spider. The silence quickly turned into animated chatter, with students expressing their amazement and reconsidering the potential uses of a wand. Blake, meanwhile, was more pleased with the system notifications flooding his consciousness than with the praise from his peers. He had not only saved Neville's toad, but also earned a bronze treasure chest for his efforts. As he picked up the defeated spider, the admiration and surprise of the students filled the carriage, marking the beginning of Blake's reputation as not just a talented wizard, but an innovative one as well. Blake was in the midst of a real bounty as numerous treasure chests flooded his account. The influx was primarily bronze treasure chests, but with the newly unlocked merging function, Blake was indiscriminate in his acceptance of any treasure chest that came his way. Amidst the excitement, Blake coughed softly to clear his throat before raising his voice to address the crowd. "Excuse me, whose spider is this?" he inquired, looking around. Lee Jordan, looking somewhat embarrassed, stepped forward. "That would be mine," he admitted sheepishly. "It's all Fred's fault. He cast a swelling spell on it, and things just got out of hand." Lee Jordan was visibly concerned about the potential consequences. In his mind, if the spider had merely consumed a toad, the situation could be easily remedied with a simple replacement. However, the possibility of the spider injuring someone was far more serious and could lead to expulsion. "Where did you find this spider?" Blake asked, intrigued. Lee Jordan explained, "I caught it near the Forbidden Forest before the summer vacation. I only intended to use it for a scare, but I never anticipated." Blake quickly pieced together the situation. The spider must be a descendant of Aragog, albeit many generations removed. Despite its young age, the 8-eyed giant spider possessed potent venom. Blake couldn't decide if Lee Jordan was fortunate or not. However, it was clear that the spider's intended target was not Raffles, but another young wizard. "Do you still want the spider?" Blake queried. Lee Jordan hastily declined. No, then I'll take it off your hands. I'm acquainted with Hagrid. He'll know how to handle this creature," Blake offered confidently. "Really? That would be wonderful," Lee Jordan exclaimed, visibly relieved. As Lee Jordan expressed his gratitude, Blake received a notification for a reward, 1 silver chest. Lee Jordan introduced himself and offered his assistance in the future before departing, likely in search of the Weasley twins. Neville Longbottom, who had been watching the scene unfold, approached Blake with tears in his eyes, expressing his gratitude for saving Raffles from the spider's web. Blake introduced himself and assured Neville that it was no trouble at all. After receiving additional silver treasure chests generated from Neville's gratitude, Blake, under the watchful eyes of the onlookers, carried the spider back to the carriage. Hermione and Cassandra reacted differently to the sight of the spider, with Hermione showing disdain and Cassandra fear. Blake playfully teased Cassandra about her fear of spiders before transforming a cake box into a solid metal cage with a tap of his wand. He then placed the now significantly smaller spider, which had shrunk from the size of a basketball to that of a teapot due to the failure of the swelling spell, into the cage. Hermione, curious about Blake's intentions, inquired about his plans for the spider and who Hagrid was. Blake explained that Hagrid was the gamekeeper at Hogwarts and was well-versed in dealing with such creatures. Hermione's concern grew as she pondered whether Blake intended to keep the spider himself. Blake, with a chuckle, hinted at his interest in the creature, particularly noting the value of the giant 8-eyed spider's venom. The venom of the giant eight-eyed spider was valued at a staggering 100 gold coins, primarily due to the creature's ferocity. Extracting venom from a living specimen was nearly an impossible feat. One only needed to consider the size of Aragog to understand the difficulty of such a task. Blake, however, was a great druid. If he could tame the giant eight-eyed spider, he would not only be able to harvest its venom, but also gain a formidable battle pet, a veritable goose that laid golden eggs. The idea of parting with such a treasure was unthinkable to him. Oh, keeping such a dangerous creature? If you're discovered, you'll be expelled. Hermione exclaimed, her voice laced with anxiety. It's all right. I'll entrust it to Hagrid, Blake reassured her. When it comes to magical creatures, he and I share the same appreciation. He'll agree to help me care for it. The best part, Blake thought, was that he wouldn't have to worry about the cost of feeding it. How splendid. Suddenly, Hermione gasped and collapsed onto the sofa in fright. The giant eight-eyed spider within the cage had awakened, its 8 eyes fixating on Blake as its chelicerae frantically tore at the enclosure. "Can your cage hold up?" Hermione asked, her concern evident. Cassandra, who had been sitting at a distance, overheard Hermione's question and shuddered in fear, casting a wary glance their way. "Don't worry," Blake said calmly, placing a palm on the cage. Instantly, the spider calmed down as Blake channeled a steady flow of druidic magic into its body through the cage. The spider's injuries began to heal rapidly, and its previously fierce and violent eyes started to clear. In no time, Blake had successfully tamed the young giant eight-eyed spider. Now completely obedient to Blake's commands, the spider could even allow Blake to see through its eyes, thanks to the Archdruid template. Blake had initially considered letting the spider out for a stroll, but decided against it, not wanting to frighten Hermione and Cassandra. He then carefully placed the now docile spider into his suitcase. The rest of the journey passed without incident. However, Blake's actions had not gone unnoticed. His friends, having learned of his location, came to visit. Senior Penello was particularly curious about the spider Blake had stowed away. Hannah, too, showed up outside the carriage, though she had been too apprehensive to enter earlier. After bidding farewell to his friends, Hermione remarked, "So, these are friends you made in Diagon Alley? And they're all girls?" "Yes," Blake replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "And interestingly, there's one from each of the 4 academies." "Enough of that. We need to change our clothes," Cassandra interjected, her expression darkening as she ushered Blake out. "The train is about to arrive at Hogwarts. Please leave your luggage on the train. We will send it to the school for you," announced a loud voice throughout the train. As the train slowed to a stop, Blake leaned on his suitcase, tapping it lightly with his wand. The patterns on the suitcase seemed to come alive, securing it firmly. Now, no one but Blake could open it. Leaving his suitcase on the train, Blake joined the throng of students heading towards the exit, aware of Cassandra and Hermione following closely behind. Stepping off the train, he was greeted by the chilly air. "Freshman! Freshman over here! Harry, are you okay?" Hagrid's booming voice called out. "Look, there's Hagrid, my friend," Blake said to Hermione, introducing her to the giant man as they embarked on their first adventure at Hogwarts. Hermione gazed up at the towering figure of Hagrid, her eyes wide with astonishment. "Hey, Blake, how have you been?" she heard him say. "Great. When are we going to have that barbecue?" Blake responded with enthusiasm. "All right. I'll see you after class tomorrow." Hagrid made plans with Blake, sealing their arrangement. Harry, amidst the bustling crowd, wished to greet Blake as well. However, the sea of people between them and his shorter stature compared to Hagrid made it impossible for him to catch Blake's attention. "All right, freshmen, this way. Watch your step," Blake called out, leading the new students with a spirited tone. He hopped into a boat, and soon everyone followed suit, eager to join him on the journey across the lake. Everyone, that is, except for Hermione, Cassandra, and the timid Hannah. "Which house do you hope to be sorted into?" Blake inquired, breaking the silence that had settled among them. "Ha! Slytherin, of course," Cassandra declared with pride. "Slytherin is known for its elegance, wit, and ambition." "I won't be going to Slytherin," Hermione interjected firmly. "I've done my research. Slytherin has produced a significant number of, let's just say, less than admirable wizards and witches." If I had a choice, I'd choose Gryffindor, she continued, her voice filled with conviction. After all, Professor Dumbledore was a Gryffindor. Blake, wouldn't you want to join Gryffindor too? Cassandra, not to be outdone, retorted, Blake is incredibly talented. He belongs in Slytherin. Go to Gryffindor, Hermione insisted. Go to Slytherin, Cassandra countered. Blake, however, remained unfazed by their debate and turned his attention to Hannah. And what about you, Hannah? Which house do you aspire to join? My father was in Hufflepuff, so... Hannah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Oh, Blake acknowledged, understanding her sentiment. Then, turning the question back to him, Cassandra asked, What about you, Blake? Which house do you wish to be sorted into? In this moment, the conversation among the students not only highlighted their personal preferences and aspirations, but also underscored the diverse values and legacies represented by each house at Hogwarts. The anticipation of the Sorting Hat's decision loomed over them, a pivotal moment that would define their paths in the magical world. Chapter 52. What? Newt is also Blake's daddy? As Cassandra posed her question, a hush fell over the group. Their eyes turned to Blake, eager for his response. I don't mind. I'll go wherever you're sorted, Blake said, casually resting his arm behind his head. It won't hinder my journey to becoming stronger. Blake had prepared for this moment. He had honed his brain seal technique during the holidays, advancing it to nearly an intermediate level. This technique sealed away only a portion of his memory related to the system and his transmigrator identity, leaving the rest for the Sorting Hat to analyze. Despite the risk of the hat breaking his seal, Blake wasn't overly concerned. After all, he harbored no grand ambitions of world domination, and he doubted Dumbledore would see him as a threat. You're a shoo-in for Slytherin, Cassandra declared confidently. I think Blake belongs in Gryffindor, Hermione interjected, recalling Blake's solitary battle against a hidden monster. His bravery in that moment epitomized Gryffindor's values. Hannah, however, remained silent. The stigma of Hufflepuff being a haven for the less ambitious made her believe Blake wouldn't want to join her potential house. Blake reassured them, It doesn't really matter to me. Any house will do. As they spoke, their boat glided automatically through the fog, drawing closer to the castle. Hannah's anxiety became palpable. I heard from the red-haired boy that entering the school involves battling monsters, she confessed, her voice tinged with fear. But I don't know any combat spells. Cassandra and Hermione tensed up at this revelation. Hogwarts traditions were shrouded in mystery, and even Cassandra, despite her lineage, was clueless about the sorting process. Blake chuckled, aiming to ease their worries. It's not as dire as you think. If the sorting ceremony were truly dangerous, wouldn't we have seen some of the older students missing limbs? Trust me, there's no danger in the sorting ceremony. His assurance brought a collective sigh of relief from the girls. The boat soon reached an underground dock, and they disembarked onto a gravel path that led them to the castle's entrance. Under the silver moonlight, they ascended a flight of stone steps and gathered before a massive oak door. Hagrid, having ensured everyone was present, knocked thrice on the door, which swung open to reveal Professor McGonagall. Her emerald-green robes and solemn expression commanded immediate respect. Blake noticed her gaze linger on him briefly before she proceeded with the formalities. Welcome to Hogwarts, Professor McGonagall began, introducing the school and its rules in a lengthy speech. Afterward, she reminded everyone to maintain their appearance and left the foyer. The atmosphere among the first-year students was tense with anticipation. None knew what awaited them next. Hannah looked particularly pale, while Hermione quietly recited a spell under her breath, preparing for whatever challenge lay ahead. Cassandra gripped her small hand tightly as ghosts suddenly emerged, causing a stir among the young wizards. Greem, with a slightly shocked expression, acknowledged the situation. You're right, Greem. Promptly, everyone began to form a line to enter the Great Hall, signaling the start of the sorting ceremony. Blake's attention was drawn to Dumbledore, who occupied the principal seat. Upon noticing Blake, Dumbledore offered a slight smile, sparking curiosity in Blake's mind about which house he would be assigned to. Given his lineage, Blake had a strong likelihood of being placed in Gryffindor. However, he also carried a part of Grindelwald's bloodline, which suggested that, Had Grindelwald attended Hogwarts, he would have been a fit for Slytherin. The question loomed, which house will Blake ultimately belong to? Theoretically, Blake's options were narrowed down to either Slytherin or Gryffindor. In Gryffindor, Blake might embody traits more akin to Dumbledore, whereas in Slytherin, he could lean towards Grindelwald's characteristics. Despite his outward calmness, Dumbledore was filled with anticipation, secretly hoping Blake would follow a path more similar to his own. The Great Hall was enchanted, its velvet ceiling sprinkled with starlight and countless candles floating mid-air, mirroring the night sky outside. "There's magic here," Blake observed, echoing Hermione's whispers about Hogwarts enchantments. Professor McGonagall, standing solemnly beside the stool and the sorting hat, commenced the ceremony after outlining the rules. The process was simple: sit on the stool, don the hat, and let it determine the most suitable house. As the sorting hat sang its song, Blake surveyed the professors, noting Professor McGonagall's stern demeanor, Professor Flitwick's fairy lineage, Professor Snape's intense gaze fixed on Harry Potter, and Professor Sprout's comforting, earthy presence. "Now, let's begin the sorting," Professor McGonagall announced, cutting through Blake's thoughts. One by one, students were called up, placed the hat on their heads, and were sorted into their houses. When it was Hermione Granger's turn, she glanced back at Blake before briskly walking up to the stool. Shortly after, she was sorted into Gryffindor. As Dumbledore's gaze intensified on Blake, it was clear he was next, given the alphabetical order of surnames. "Blake Green," Professor McGonagall called out, her eyes briefly assessing Blake and noting his resemblance to a young Dumbledore, especially his eyes. Snape sneered upon hearing Blake's name, cynically thinking, "Everyone named Blake is trouble. Just like Potter, there's something dishonest about him." As Blake approached the stool, the hall erupted into whispers and murmurs. "Oh, he's the one who defeated that giant spider on the train with his wand." The students buzzed with excitement, recounting Blake's bravery. "I never knew wands could be used like that," exclaimed one student, their eyes wide with amazement. "I've made up my mind. Next time, I'll ask Ollivander if he can reinforce my wand with a layer of metal," declared another, their voice filled with determination. "Wow, this boy is so handsome. I wonder if he'll mind that I'm a few years older than him," a girl whispered to her friend, her eyes following the new student. "You're dreaming. He's mine," her friend retorted possessively. "Ahem! Quiet, please!" Professor McGonagall interjected, swiftly restoring order to the noisy Great Hall. Blake stood confidently in front of the gathered students, his gaze steady. Professor McGonagall, holding the sorting hat, gestured for him to take a seat. Blake inhaled deeply, his mind racing. Would his brain seal technique prove effective? The outcome hinged on this very moment. Below him, Cassandra watched with bated breath, her eyes conveying a silent plea. "You must be sorted into Slytherin," she thought fervently. The Malfoy trio, meanwhile, could barely conceal their apprehension. They silently prayed, "Please, Merlin, don't let him be sorted into Slytherin, please." Blake took his seat, and Professor McGonagall gently placed the sorting hat atop his head. The hat, oversized as it was, drooped over his eyes, shrouding his gaze. At the head table, Dumbledore leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with anticipation. "Compared to Grindelwald, this boy might share more similarities with me," he mused quietly. No sooner had the hat settled on Blake's head than he felt a faint magical presence probing his mind, scanning the memories laid bare before it. To his relief, the intrusion was gentle, retreating as swiftly as it had arrived. Then, a voice echoed in his mind. Ambitious and smart, you'd fit well in Slytherin, but your courage and fearless spirit are traits worthy of Gryffindor. Ah, and there's a genuine thirst for knowledge in you, suggesting Ravenclaw might be your home. Oh, what's this? I sense loyalty and trustworthiness, qualities prized by Hufflepuff. This is quite the conundrum." The sorting hat seemed to be in a genuine quandary, its voice reflecting its indecision. "It's been ages since I've encountered such a challenging case. The last time was with Minerva McGonagall, and even then, it was a choice between just Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. But you could thrive in any of the houses. This is truly remarkable." As the minutes ticked by, the Great Hall buzzed with whispered speculations and curious glances. The sorting hat's prolonged deliberation was unprecedented in recent memory. Feeling the weight of the silence, Blake decided to intervene mentally. "Have you reached a decision on which house I should join?" he inquired internally. The Sorting Hat's response was almost immediate. "Not yet. Each house seems fitting in its own way, but I've realized I've neglected to ask for your preference. Which house do you feel drawn to?" Blake pondered the question briefly before replying. "Which house embodies all the qualities you mentioned?" "Ah, of course, it's Hufflepuff. How could I overlook that?" Helga Hufflepuff's founding principle was to offer a place to everyone, without exception. Indeed, Hufflepuff is the most inclusive and fitting house for someone of your unique qualities. "So, are you willing to join Hufflepuff?" the Sorting Hat asked, its voice tinged with hope. Blake responded without hesitation, "I'm willing. After all, you've made it clear that Hufflepuff is where I can truly belong and thrive." With that, the Sorting Hat made its decision, and Blake was sorted into Hufflepuff, much to the surprise and delight of everyone in the Great Hall. Is this truly the most suitable house for me? The question hung in the air, only to be answered with a decisive proclamation. Indeed, the most suitable house for you is Hufflepuff. The declaration echoed through the hall, leaving a trail of astonishment in its wake. Cassandra's green eyes widened in disbelief. How could this be possible? The Sorting Hat's hesitation was a rare occurrence in the annals of Hogwarts history. Yet, never before had it wavered so significantly, only to assign someone to Hufflepuff. This unexpected decision sparked a wave of confusion among the students, mirroring Cassandra's own shock. Professor McGonagall exchanged a look of utter surprise with Dumbledore. The latter seemed even more taken aback, so much so that his beard dipped into his drink without him noticing. Dumbledore's thoughts raced. "I had assumed this child would follow in my footsteps into Gryffindor, or perhaps tread the path of Grindelwald into Slytherin. But now—" A ludicrous thought struck Dumbledore, causing his mind to reel. Grindelwald faced numerous defeats at the hands of Newt Scamander. Could it be that he actually shares blood with Newt? Does this imply that Newt Scamander could be this child's father? Dumbledore pondered, the idea seeming more absurd the more he thought about it. Yet, the child's evident affinity for magical creatures lent some credence to this wild speculation. The hall buzzed with whispers and speculation, as everyone tried to make sense of the Sorting Hat's unusual decision. The implications of Dumbledore's thoughts remained unspoken, but the intrigue surrounding the new Hufflepuff member had just begun to unfold. Chapter 53. Grindelwald. What? You got into Hufflepuff? It's okay if you can't beat it. Join. Despite the unexpected turn of events for Dumbledore and others, the first table on the right, belonging to Hufflepuff, erupted in warm applause and cheers once again. Whenever the Sorting Hat hesitated, it indicated that the individual in question was either at one extreme or the other, a complete fool or a sheer genius. Blake's actions on the train had already showcased his bravery and decisiveness. His unconventional method of using a metal wand like a hammer to defeat the eight-eyed giant spider clearly demonstrated he was far from a fool. At the faculty table, Professor Sprout clapped her hands with joy, while Professor McGonagall looked on helplessly. Dumbledore, too, had to come to terms with the outcome. Although Blake had been sorted into Hufflepuff and not Gryffindor, it also meant he didn't resemble Grindelwald in ambition, which was a relief. After all, Hufflepuff had its merits, as evidenced by Newt Scamander's significant contributions to defeating Grindelwald. Blake stood, offering silent thanks to the Sorting Hat before returning it to Professor McGonagall. He then made his way to the Hufflepuff table, where the house's ghost, the Fat Friar, greeted him with a wave. Among the welcoming crowd, Blake's eyes were drawn to Cedric Diggory, whose handsomeness he acknowledged, albeit with a playful note that Cedric was still not as handsome as himself. Settling beside Hannah, who was too shy to meet his gaze, Blake couldn't hide his smile as he shook hands with his new housemates. The Hufflepuff's enthusiasm was overwhelming, and soon after, his system notifications were flooded with joy, followed by a surge of treasure chests. At the Gryffindor table, Hermione looked on in surprise, not sharing the same anger as Cassandra, who was visibly upset at Blake's enjoyment. The sorting ceremony continued, with Harry Potter being sorted into Gryffindor, as he had wished, and Cassandra into Slytherin, her initial displeasure fading as she was warmly welcomed by her house. Once the sorting was concluded, Dumbledore stood, welcoming the students to the new school year with a few choice words that left the hall in stitches. As he concluded, the banquet began, and the tables were magically laden with food, including a vast array of dishes, and notably for Blake, a large plate of honey strawberry pudding. This chapter showcases the unexpected twists of the sorting ceremony, highlighting the diverse and vibrant community at Hogwarts. Blake's sorting into Hufflepuff adds a new layer to his journey, promising adventures and friendships in this humble yet brave house. At the rostrum, Dumbledore raised the cup before him, prompting Blake to lift his own glass of pumpkin juice in response. The banquet spread was lavish, though not quite to Blake's standards, but he was far from picky and indulged to his heart's content. It was a pleasant experience. However, Hannah, seated next to him, became significantly more talkative upon seeing the array of delicious dishes. Her initial shyness vanished as she engaged Blake in a lively discussion about the merits and flaws of each dish. Unbeknownst to her, many girls eyed her with envy, wishing they could be in her place, conversing happily with such a handsome and powerful boy. Among these girls, Hermione and Cassandra wore the most complex expressions, regretting their oversight. They had been at odds for so long, only for Hannah to effortlessly step in. After everyone had eaten their fill, the remaining food vanished from the plates, leaving them spotless once again, followed by an assortment of desserts that reignited Blake's appetite. Once the feast concluded, Dumbledore stood, capturing everyone's attention with an announcement. He issued a stern warning, particularly to the freshmen, about the forbidden forest on the school grounds and a mysterious corridor on the 4th floor that was off-limits to avoid any unfortunate accidents. Blake, while listening, couldn't help but glance at Quirrell, who appeared unaffected by the warning. Despite Quirrell's nonchalant demeanor, Blake sensed the underlying tension. He knew Dumbledore's mention of the forbidden corridor was a trap for Quirrell, who was undoubtedly interested in the Philosopher's Stone hidden there. However, Blake felt detached from the situation, more intrigued by the mysteries of the Forbidden Forest than the stone's allure. Resolving not to explore tonight due to exhaustion from the day's journey, Blake awaited Dumbledore's dismissal for a well-deserved rest. However, Dumbledore's call for everyone to sing the school song together momentarily froze Blake's smile. Upon entering Hufflepuff's common room with the house's provost, Blake was immediately charmed by its ambience. The common room and dormitories, adorned with vines and plants, resembled a forest, making Blake, an archdruid, feel right at home. The abundance of food, readily available at any moment, reflected the house elves' fondness for Hufflepuff, a legacy of Helga Hufflepuff's kindness towards them. Unlike other houses, Hufflepuff dormitories housed only 3 beds each, offering a more comfortable living arrangement. Led by the provost, Blake found his dormitory, appreciating the welcoming and cozy atmosphere that Hufflepuff provided. Blake's bed was positioned on the far left of the room, with his suitcase resting quietly on the cabinet at the foot of the bed. At that moment, his 2 dormitory roommates entered. They were a contrasting pair. One boy was notably overweight, reminiscent of Crabbe in his build, with an unusual buzz cut, while the other was slender and shorter, his face adorned with noticeable freckles. The larger boy extended his hand towards Blake with excitement. "Hello, I'm Wayne Hopkins. You can call me Wayne. I'm thrilled to be sharing a dormitory with you." Blake responded with equal enthusiasm, shaking his hand. "Hello, my name is Blake Green. Feel free to call me Blake." The boy with freckles chimed in. "Me too. It's an honor to share a dormitory with you. We all witnessed your impressive display on the train. I had no idea wands could be utilized in such a manner." He paused, realizing his excitement might have been a bit much, and extended his hand as well. "Ahem, sorry for my outburst. I'm Roger Malone, but you can just call me Roger." Friendships among boys often form swiftly, and it didn't take long for the trio to become acquainted with each other. They spent the night engaged in conversation until it was time to say goodnight and retreat to their beds. Blake felt a sense of happiness as he lay down. He had made 2 new friends, even though they were not mentioned in the original Harry Potter narrative. But this was reality, where every individual was a living, breathing entity. As Blake settled in, he noticed the notebook in his pocket vibrating gently, a signal that Grindelwald was trying to reach him. This notebook, a gift from Grindelwald delivered by a house elf half a month earlier, allowed Blake to communicate with the Dark Lord, who was thousands of miles away. Turning on his desk lamp, Blake opened the notebook to find it blank. Pressing his finger on the lower right corner of the title page, words began to appear in the empty space. "Is the suitcase I arranged for you satisfactory? Did that old fool Dumbledore allow you to travel to the station alone? I knew he couldn't be relied upon. Which house were you sorted into?" Seeing Grindelwald's handwriting brought a slight smile to Blake's face. Despite Grindelwald's reputation as a Dark Lord, he had shown genuine care for Blake, from the house elf to the gifted suitcase. Over the past half a month, Blake had learned much from Grindelwald, knowledge that Dumbledore would have found inconvenient to impart. However, both Dumbledore and Grindelwald shared a common stance against Blake learning dark magic at his current age, albeit for different reasons. If Dumbledore were aware of the extent of Grindelwald's teachings, he would undoubtedly be furious enough to confront him in Austria. Blake retrieved a pen given to him by Hermione from his system warehouse and began to reply in the notebook. "The suitcase is very useful. Thank you." As soon as he finished writing, the words were absorbed into the paper and vanished. Although the system warehouse couldn't store living beings, the suitcase proved invaluable for temporarily housing an 8-eyed giant spider, making it extremely useful. Blake then wrote, "Please, don't refer to Professor Dumbledore as old and confused. He's simply very busy." Shortly after his handwriting disappeared, another message from Grindelwald appeared. "Busy. Ha! I wonder with what. He's been a headmaster for so many years. Doesn't he have a few trustworthy deputies? Must he handle everything personally? He couldn't even spare the time to escort you to the station? Never mind. Now tell me, which house were you sorted into?" The exchange between Grindelwald and Dumbledore highlighted their differing perspectives and concerns, yet both seemed to have Blake's best interests at heart, albeit in their unique ways. In the same vein of thought, they were curious to see which side of the family Blake would take after more. Would he resemble Grindelwald, or would he lean towards Dumbledore's traits? Grindelwald, harboring this curiosity, found himself secretly wishing for Blake to be sorted into Slytherin. Such an outcome would signify that the boy shared more similarities with him. However, when Blake penned down, "I was assigned to Hufflepuff, in Austria, at Numengard, within the confines of a narrow stone chamber," Grindelwald was left staring at the notebook in his hands, utterly dumbfounded. The revelation was beyond his expectations. The thought that his and Dumbledore's progeny could bear resemblance to Newt was inconceivable. "Impossible! I didn't incorporate Newt's lineage," he exclaimed, bewildered by the turn of events. "How did this come to pass?" Time elapsed as Grindelwald wrestled with his disbelief, eventually attempting to console himself. "Well, it seems he doesn't take after me, nor does he mirror Dumbledore," he mused with a forced chuckle. "Newt, a Hufflepuff. Ha, well, if you can't beat them, join them," he remarked, a sense of resignation in his tone. Meanwhile, at Hogwarts, Blake was nearly dozing off with the notebook still in his grasp. The writing on the page shifted once more. "This is quite the surprise," it read. "But, after the holidays, I recommend you seek out that old buffoon and have him introduce you to Newt. You should learn everything you can from that man." Blake couldn't help but stifle a laugh. It amazed him how, after all these years, the old man still harbored such animosity towards Newt Scamander. Following a brief exchange, Blake tucked the notebook away and surrendered to sleep. His exhaustion was overwhelming, to the point where he couldn't muster the energy to even open the box. Chapter 54, The Levitation Cloak and the Handsome Cat. Early in the morning, Blake was gently awakened by something softly rubbing against his face. As he slowly opened his eyes, he was greeted by a pair of small, gleaming eyes staring back at him. "Oh, Dabao, stop it. I want to sleep a bit longer," Blake mumbled, trying to turn away from the persistent nudging. "Squeak, squeak, squeak!" Dabao, the name Blake had affectionately given to his magical pet, was not having any of it. In a fit of impatience, Dabao scampered over to the nightstand, grabbed the alarm clock, and unceremoniously dropped it onto Blake. Ouch. All right. I'll get you something to eat, Blake conceded, his sleepiness instantly vanishing, replaced by a mix of hunger and responsibility. Sitting up, he glanced at the alarm clock that had been used as a wake-up projectile. It was only 8 o'clock in the morning, and his first class wasn't until 9, so there was no rush. DeBow, now satisfied with the reaction, hopped over to Blake's suitcase and skillfully opened a small crack to slip inside. Moments later, it emerged, dragging out a metal cage. Inside, the 8-eyed giant spider Blake had tamed the day before looked at him with what could only be described as a pitiful gaze. Blake had forgotten to feed it the previous night. Since their journey on the train, the spider had been left hungry, which explained its earlier attempt to snack on Raffles. Realizing his oversight, Blake put on a stern face. "Ahem, I left you hungry all night as punishment for your behavior yesterday," he declared, trying to mask his forgetfulness. "It's not because I forgot, you understand?" The spider's 8 legs trembled, a sign that could either be interpreted as understanding or simply weakness from hunger. Glancing at the other 2 beds in the room, Blake noted that his roommates, Wayne and Roger, whom he had just met the night before, were still asleep. Taking advantage of the quiet, he retrieved a small box from his suitcase. This box was enchanted with a traceless stretching spell and a freshness-preserving charm, allowing Blake to store a variety of ingredients. Opening the iron cage, Blake took out a large piece of raw beef from the box and placed it on a plate. He then pushed the plate towards the spider, which eyed the meat eagerly, its eyes turning a vivid shade of green. However, it waited patiently for Blake's command, despite its overwhelming hunger. "Go ahead," Blake finally said, and the spider pounced on the meat with fervor. Turning his attention back to DeBow, Blake didn't want to neglect his other magical companion. He placed another plate in front of DeBow and filled it with a bottle of milk, an apple, and a generous portion of pet food. "Go ahead," he told DeBow, who eagerly opened the milk bottle with a small paw and began to drink heartily. Watching his magical pets enjoy their breakfast, Blake felt a pang of hunger himself. However, as a Hufflepuff, he knew he would never have to worry about food. The house elves were diligent in ensuring that the students were well fed, quietly replenishing the food supply daily. After finishing his morning routine, Blake sat back on his bed with a piece of fresh strawberry cake, savoring each bite. His thoughts then drifted to the treasures waiting in his system space. "What a bounty!" he mused, looking over the collection of treasure chests in his virtual inventory. Besides the 6 gold chests at the top, there were numerous silver and bronze chests densely packed below. Blake decided to consolidate all the bronze chests into silver ones, ending up with a total of 40 silver treasure chests. The excitement was palpable as he contemplated his next move. With 40 silver chests, he could synthesize 4 gold chests, adding to his existing 6. This meant he had the exact number needed to create a diamond treasure chest. Faced with a decision, Blake pondered whether to open the 10 gold chests individually or combine them into a single, potentially more valuable diamond chest. With exact, 10 gold chests at his disposal, the choice was tantalizing. Blake weighed his options, considering the potential rewards and risks of each path. Blake had just made a significant decision after weighing his options between the gold and diamond treasure chests. With the allure of the rare druid talent and a custom wand that rivaled his old one in power, he chose to prioritize the diamond treasure chests, knowing well that gold chests would come by more frequently, but diamond ones were a rarity. Determined, he converted 40 silver treasure chests into 4 gold ones, and then further synthesized these into a single diamond treasure chest. The once page-filled system space now showcased a solitary treasure chest, leaving Blake with a mix of distress and anticipation. Yet, he reassured himself of the worthiness of his choice. He didn't rush to open the newly formed diamond treasure chest. Instead, he lingered over the virtual screen, his finger hesitating over the chest as he discovered that only 7 diamond chests were needed to create a supreme treasure chest, a number significantly less than he had anticipated. This revelation filled him with excitement, as the goal seemed much more attainable than he had initially thought. "System, open the diamond treasure chest for me," Blake commanded. The system responded promptly, revealing that Blake had obtained a levitation cloak, albeit a blue version that was upgradable. The mention of it being akin to Doctor Strange's iconic red levitation cloak from the Marvel Universe piqued Blake's interest, despite the initial disappointment of it being a lesser version. The red cloak was renowned for its ability to grant its wearer the power of flight, along with formidable physical and magical defenses, and even the capability to change its appearance at will. Blake couldn't help but imagine the advantages such an artifact would bring, especially in capturing magical creatures. Upon further inspection, Blake learned that the blue levitation cloak he had acquired shared many of the red cloak's abilities, albeit at a reduced capacity. It lacked the ability to fly and levitate, and its defensive properties were not as strong. However, the system informed him that the cloak could be upgraded to the red version by collecting magical animal materials. This news reignited Blake's enthusiasm, as acquiring such materials was well within his capabilities. Eager to test his new acquisition, Blake summoned the blue cloak from the system space. It responded to his call, wrapping around him and transforming into a brand new school uniform robe at his command. Despite its limitations compared to the red version, Blake was impressed by the cloak's capabilities. To test its defensive properties, he lightly struck his arm with his mithril wand, only to find that the cloak absorbed the impact, leaving him unharmed. This experience confirmed Blake's belief in the potential of his new magical item. Although it was not the coveted red levitation cloak, the blue version still held significant power and versatility. With the possibility of upgrading it, Blake felt a renewed sense of purpose and excitement for his future adventures. Blake had just acquired a blue cloak, which, although not as defensively powerful as its red counterpart, was still a significant upgrade. He was excited about the protection it would offer against future plots and schemes. However, before he could test its magical defenses, the sound of his own actions seemed to stir his roommates, Wayne and Roger, from their slumber. Hastily, Blake stowed his wand away. The eight-eyed giant spider, having finished off a large piece of beef, sensed the movement and scurried back to its cage, not wanting to cause any alarm and risk being punished with a lack of food. It even managed to close the cage door behind itself, demonstrating an impressive level of self-discipline. Dabao, meanwhile, casually licked the plate clean before tossing an apple core aside, then proceeded to pack the spider's cage into a suitcase. By this time, Roger and Wayne had managed to extricate themselves from their bedding. Stretching and sitting up, they noticed Blake already up and about. Roger, puzzled, asked, "Blake, did you hear that just now? The sound of metal, like." Wayne chimed in, "Like the sound you made when you knocked on the spider's head." Blake, with a cough to clear his throat, replied while munching on a cake, "Actually, I have 3 pieces of bad news for you." "What bad news?" they asked in unison. "The first piece of bad news is that it's already 8:30. The second is that our first class starts at 9, and the third is that it's Professor McGonagall's transfiguration class." Their reactions were immediate and filled with dismay. "Why didn't you wake us up sooner?" they protested, to which Blake, revealing his cloak transformed into a school uniform, quipped, "I told you, I just got up. Look, I'm still in my pajamas." Hastily, Wayne and Roger got ready, and Blake, remembering the day's first lesson was transfiguration, prepared himself by applying a crushed plant to his hands and quill, muttering about the risks and rewards of wealth. The boys managed to get ready quickly, skipping breakfast in the Great Hall and heading straight to the Transfiguration classroom. Despite their haste, the ever-changing corridors and staircases of Hogwarts delayed them, and they arrived just as the clock struck 9. They weren't the only ones running late. Harry and Ronald were also rushing from another corridor. Roger lamented their tardiness, cursing the confusing layout of Hogwarts, while Wayne expressed his frustration. Blake, however, noticed that Professor McGonagall hadn't arrived yet and urged them to calm down. Harry, seeing that they were all late, felt a bit relieved. "Good morning, Harry. You guys got up late too?" Blake greeted. "No, this road is just too hard to find. If only there were afternoon classes, we could have scouted the location beforehand," Harry replied. The 5 of them, representing the camaraderie between Gryffindor and Hufflepuff, and contrasting with the dynamics between Slytherin and Ravenclaw, entered the classroom together. To their relief, Professor McGonagall hadn't arrived yet. However, Blake's eyes caught sight of a beautiful tabby cat squatting on the podium, and he tensed, realizing that their professor might be closer than they thought. Teeth gritted in anticipation, Blake proclaimed, "Fortune favors the bold. If luck is on our side, we might even stumble upon another diamond treasure chest. And at the very least, we're guaranteed a gold one." Unlike Harry and the others, who proceeded to their seats, Blake was drawn as if by a magnet straight to the podium, his eyes fixed on the tabby cat perched there. "Wow, what a magnificent cat!" he exclaimed, pulling out a quill. With a flick of his wrist, he transformed the quill into a toy stick right then and there. Professor McGonagall, already irked by the tardiness of the 5 students, watched Blake approach. Initially puzzled by his actions, her curiosity turned to surprise when she witnessed the quill morph into a toy stick. Impressive transfiguration skills, she mused, only to catch herself. But now is hardly the time for such observations. What on earth is he doing with that toy stick? Her astonishment quickly gave way to indignation as she realized Blake was daring to tease her in her cat form with the toy. She was about to revert to her human form to reprimand the audacious student when a potent scent arrested her movements. The aroma emanating from the toy stick was unmistakably that of catnip. "Blake!" she exclaimed, a mixture of shock and anger in her voice. At that moment, an automated voice chimed in Blake's head, emotions of shock and anger detected, followed by, "Congratulations to the host for obtaining a gold treasure chest." This scene, unfolding in the Hogwarts classroom, showcased not only Blake's boldness, but also his quick thinking and proficiency in magic. His unconventional approach, while initially seeming reckless, cleverly capitalized on Professor McGonagall's feline instincts, turning a potential reprimand into an opportunity for reward. Chapter 55. Blake, the Bravery of Hogwarts. Blake couldn't believe his misfortune. To his dismay, he had only managed to obtain a guaranteed gold treasure chest. "System, did you secretly alter the drop rates?" he wondered. However, this was not the moment for such thoughts. Upon entering the classroom, everyone had noticed the tabby cat lounging casually. Many had been forewarned by upperclassmen that during the first transfiguration class, Professor McGonagall enjoyed greeting her new students in her animagus form of a tabby cat. She would use this guise to observe the newcomers. Thus, aware of the cat's true identity, no one dared to disturb it, choosing instead to quietly preview their textbooks. Yet, what they witnessed next was nothing short of astonishing. The same student who had heroically defeated a large spider on the train the day before was displaying his bravery once again. Armed with a cat toy, he boldly approached the cat. This act was utterly absurd. Animagi, upon transforming, often exhibit behaviors characteristic of their animal forms. And as it turned out, catnip was indeed effective on Professor McGonagall. Struggling against the overwhelming allure of the catnip, she managed to revert to her human form. The classroom fell into a stunned silence. Those in the know were shocked by Blake's audacious act, while others, previously unaware of the cat's true identity, were astounded to witness Professor McGonagall's transformation. A few students who had secretly wished to pet the cat themselves felt a mix of relief and envy. Hermione, realizing the gravity of Blake's action, feared the worst for him. "Blake," Professor McGonagall's voice, sharp with anger, cut through the silence. The students who had entered with Blake gasped, their eyes wide with shock and concern. Before McGonagall could finish, Blake dramatically collapsed. Wayne, quick to react, rushed to his aid, only to declare in horror, "Blake has been scared to death. He's not breathing." Professor McGonagall's anger quickly turned to panic as she rushed over to assess Blake's condition. Hermione, too, was startled by Wayne's declaration and hurried to Blake's side. Blake, however, was merely feigning unconsciousness, thinking it a clever way to avoid McGonagall's wrath. "As long as I act quickly, she won't have time to get angry. Besides, I didn't know the cat was the professor. It's natural for someone who loves animals to want to play with a cute cat, right?" he reasoned to himself. But hearing Wayne's exclamation, Blake realized his plan had backfired. "Great, now I'm supposed to be dead?" he thought, frustrated. He knew he couldn't keep up the act any longer. Feeling McGonagall's hand on his chest, checking for signs of life, Blake knew he had to come clean. With a soft quack, he slowly opened his eyes and took a deep breath, as if awakening from a deep slumber. Seeing Blake revive, everyone around him sighed in relief, including Professor McGonagall, who also felt a pang of guilt. She had learned much about Blake from Dumbledore, his origins from an experiment, his exceptional talent, and his kind nature, especially his fondness for magical creatures and animals. This knowledge made her reconsider her initial reaction. Upon seeing a cat, Blake's initial instinct was to playfully tease it, a reaction most would find normal. However, the situation took an unexpected turn when the cat transformed back into its human form, revealing itself to be Professor McGonagall. This revelation was startling, to say the least. Professor McGonagall, a known cat enthusiast, empathized with Blake's shock. She imagined her own reaction if the roles were reversed, the joy of playing with a handsome cat, only for it to morph into her professor. The thought alone was enough to make her believe she might faint from fright. With her anger now dissipated, Professor McGonagall's concern for Blake grew. She asked, "Blake, how do you feel? I'll take you to the school hospital now." Blake, however, declined the offer. With trembling hands, he retrieved a small bottle from his pocket, from which he took a pill and swallowed it. Gradually, color returned to his pale face. "Sorry, Professor, I didn't know it was you. If only I had known," Blake stammered, still shaken. Professor McGonagall quickly reassured him. "It's all right, you don't need to apologize. The fault is mine. How are you feeling now?" Blake explained that it was an old issue that hadn't surfaced in a long time, but he was accustomed to carrying his medicine with him. Professor McGonagall felt even more remorseful, realizing her sudden transformation had triggered Blake's old ailment. She considered that perhaps using a phantom spell for observation would have been a wiser choice. Despite her suggestion to skip the Transfiguration class for a medical checkup, Blake vehemently refused, fearing Madame Pomfrey might see through his disguise. Professor McGonagall, understanding Blake's unique situation as a product of an experiment, and possibly not entirely human, agreed to let him stay, but urged him to inform her if he felt unwell. With assistance from his classmates, Blake found a seat at the back of the classroom. Hermione, observing Blake, sensed there was more to his fainting spell than met the eye. As Professor McGonagall began her lecture, Blake couldn't help but wonder if he enjoyed using catmint on his cat during their playful interactions, a thought that brought a smile to his face he quickly hid. Despite not finding any diamond treasure chests in their previous endeavor, Blake was not disheartened. The transformation incident had triggered a flood of system notifications, rewarding him with a plethora of treasure chests from his classmates' reactions, including an unexpected gold treasure chest from Hermione, he speculated. As Professor McGonagall continued with the lecture, Blake busied himself with organizing the newly acquired treasure chests in his system space, which now boasted 2 gold treasure chests, over 30 bronze ones, and 2 silver, reflecting the novice status of his fellow first-year wizards. Blake's magical prowess might not have been exceptional, leading to a generally low drop rate of treasure chests. However, the recent surge in bronze treasure chests was a pleasant surprise, attributed to the shock he had recently experienced, which had slightly boosted his drop rate. Considering his usual luck, the quality of the chests was more than satisfactory. After all, not every young wizard could boast academic excellence like Hermione Granger. Thus, Blake set about combining the 30-plus bronze treasure chests in his system space, resulting in an impressive haul: 2 gold treasure chests, 5 silver treasure chests, and 3 bronze treasure chests. The transformation of these chests filled him with a sense of achievement. Meanwhile, in the Hogwarts classroom, Professor McGonagall introduced the complex and perilous art of transfiguration, emphasizing the seriousness of the subject with a stern warning against mischief. Her demonstration, transforming the podium into a pig and back again, captivated the students, igniting their eagerness to learn. Professor McGonagall, satisfied with their enthusiasm, proceeded to share her extensive notes on transfiguration, more detailed than the textbook. The students, including Blake, hastily prepared to jot down the information. Seated at the back, Blake's actions went unnoticed as he cleverly used a magical little hand to assist him in copying the notes. Unlike his peers, Blake found the content straightforward, easily understanding and memorizing the complex information. After the note-taking, Professor McGonagall delved deeper into the principles of transfiguration and presented the students with a practical challenge, turning a match into a needle. Despite their prior enthusiasm and diligent note-taking, the students found the task daunting. Even Hermione, a model student who had consulted McGonagall before term, struggled to perfect her needle. Amidst the widespread struggle, Blake excelled, moving beyond the basic task to intricately carve designs into his silver needle. His exceptional work caught Professor McGonagall's attention, earning her praise. Despite her initial frustration, she couldn't help but acknowledge Blake's skill, declaring his success with a mix of irritation and amusement. "I must add, you should have consulted me immediately after you finished your work," Professor McGonagall said, her tone a mix of reprimand and awe. "Instead, you chose to embellish it with carvings. However, I must admit, the steel needle you've created is indeed exquisite. Therefore, Hufflepuff." As soon as Professor McGonagall announced her decision, the classroom erupted into a cacophony of disbelief and admiration. "That's unbelievable," one student muttered. "Indeed, most of us can't even manage to change the match's shape," another added. "Merlin's beard, did I hear correctly? He actually carved flowers onto the needle he conjured?" a third exclaimed in astonishment. "Why doesn't he just ascend to heaven with that talent?" joked another. "Wow, that's simply astounding," echoed through the room as a wave of murmurs spread. "Silence. Focus on your matches," Professor McGonagall commanded, restoring order. "Mr. Green has shown it's possible. You can achieve it as well. Completing this task will also earn bonus points for your respective houses." As she spoke, Professor McGonagall couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret. If only Blake had been sorted into Gryffindor, those points would have been for her own house. Inspired by Blake's success, the young wizards and witches redoubled their efforts, their determination renewed. Meanwhile, Blake had discreetly retreated to the back row, contentedly counting his treasure chests, seemingly oblivious to the stir he had caused. Despite the renewed enthusiasm, success eluded everyone else until the class was nearly over. It was Hermione Granger who finally managed to transfigure her match into a perfect steel needle. "It's flawless," Professor McGonagall declared, examining the needle with a satisfied smile. "Excellent work, Ms. Granger. You're the second person to achieve success. Gryffindor will be awarded 5 points." With that, the morning's transfiguration class came to a close. As Blake made his way to the Great Hall for lunch, he was suddenly flanked by 2 identical figures. Recognizing them immediately, Blake found himself face-to-face with the Weasley twins, Fred and George. After a brief, enthusiastic greeting, the twins bombarded Blake with praise and disbelief. "Warrior," they exclaimed in unison. "To think you dared to use a cat teaser on Professor McGonagall's cat," Fred said, shaking his head in admiration. "We've wanted to try something like that for ages," George added, "but the fear of expulsion held us back." "And yet, not only did you succeed," Fred continued, "you faced no punishment. Instead, you were rewarded with 5 bonus points." George finished, both of them looking at Blake with a mix of respect and envy. Chapter 56. Cassandra, Shattered Illusions. Blake had grossly underestimated the rapid spread of gossip among the young wizards at Hogwarts. No sooner had he left his transfiguration class, eager to regale the tale of Professor McGonagall's transformation into a tabby cat, than he discovered the story had already taken Hogwarts by storm. Had Blake's actions been merely a product of youthful ignorance and bravado, they might not have elicited such a widespread reaction. However, what truly captivated the student body was not just his audacious act, but the fact that he emerged from it unscathed. Reliable sources claimed that Professor McGonagall hadn't even reprimanded him. Rumor had it she wasn't angry in the slightest and had even offered Blake an apology. To add to the astonishment, she awarded Blake's house, Hufflepuff, an extra point for his class performance. When pieced together, these events seemed utterly ludicrous. The Weasley twins, Fred and George, notorious for their own mischief, were initially skeptical of the tale. It was only after they confirmed the story with Harry and his brother Ronald, who had witnessed the event, that they accepted its truth. The idea that someone could perform such a feat and remain unpenalized, possibly even rewarded, was beyond their wildest imaginations. Even if Blake had been Professor McGonagall's own son, they reasoned, some form of retribution would have been expected. Upon confronting Blake, who was swiftly trying to extricate himself from their grasp, he protested, "It's all a misunderstanding. The story's been blown out of proportion." "What misunderstanding? Your actions are the talk of Hogwarts," they exclaimed admiringly. "You're a legend." Blake, flustered, attempted to downplay the event. "After realizing it was Professor McGonagall, I was so terrified I fainted. It's not as heroic as you make it out to be." Fred and George exchanged a look, impressed despite Blake's attempts at humility. "Incredible strategy," they marveled, feigning unconsciousness to avoid blame. "Brilliant." To Blake's dismay, he found himself hailed as a kindred spirit by the twins, his accidental feat overshadowing their own pranks. Unbeknownst to them, Blake was already contemplating how to ensure their silence. "I'm not the person you think I am," Blake thought to himself, a sense of foreboding creeping over Fred and George, as if sensing they were treading on dangerous ground. "Remember to include us in your future schemes," they said before hastily departing, leaving Blake to ponder the unexpected benefits of his actions, including the occasional appearance of a bronze treasure chest in his system space. As Blake settled down at the Hufflepuff table to make the most of his short lunch break, he was approached by another student, curious about the incident with Professor McGonagall's feline form. Blake looked up to see a rather handsome young man, Cedric Diggory, who inquired, with a mix of disbelief and curiosity, "I heard about your encounter with Professor McGonagall's cat form. Is it true?" "Senior Diggory, there's been a huge misunderstanding," Blake began, eager to set the record straight. Blake continued to defend himself, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I had no idea it was Professor McGonagall." Cedric, looking somewhat sheepish, glanced around before leaning in to whisper, "We've been wanting to try that for a while." "So, did it work? How did it feel?" Blake asked, his shock evident in his tone. He couldn't believe Cedric would betray his trust like this. "Cedric, I never expected this from you. Even if you were cut open, your heart would still be black." Despite the time spent dealing with Cedric and the others, Blake still had enough time to find the place he was looking for. After finishing his meal, he informed Wayne and Roger of his departure and left the auditorium. Heading straight for the stairs of the teaching building, he recalled the location he needed to reach when suddenly he was stopped again. "I really didn't mean to," Blake began, turning to face the newcomer with a look of resignation. "I had no idea that was." Cassandra stood behind him, her gaze cold and piercing. She scanned the area, ensuring they were alone before confronting him. "Are you avoiding me on purpose? Why did you choose Hufflepuff?" she demanded, her anger palpable. Blake had always been someone Cassandra admired, a genius who outshone her in every aspect. His assignment to Hufflepuff, a house she deemed inferior, was a blow to her pride. She could have accepted him being placed in Gryffindor or Ravenclaw, but Hufflepuff? It had to be Blake's own choice, she concluded. The Sorting Hat would have considered his preference, and his decision to join Hufflepuff felt like a deliberate attempt to avoid her. Blake faced Cassandra's accusations with a calm demeanor, choosing not to explain himself. Instead, he mimicked her cold snort, which only infuriated her further. "You dare to snort at me!" she exclaimed, her disbelief turning into confirmation of her suspicions. Blake was avoiding her. But Blake countered, "It's clear you're the one avoiding me. The school assigned me to Hufflepuff, and there was nothing I could do about it." Cassandra argued that he could have made a request to the school, to which Blake responded with feigned sadness. "I didn't know I could make such requests. So, it was the school's decision. And since I was sorted before you, why didn't you request to join Hufflepuff after seeing my assignment? Or even Gryffindor, so we could still share most classes?" His words left Cassandra speechless, her anger replaced by a dawning realization. Blake's logic was sound. It was she who had chosen Slytherin, opting not to share classes with someone from Hufflepuff, whom she deemed an idiot. Blake's concluding accusation, calling her a bad woman who played with his feelings, echoed in the silent corridor, leaving Cassandra at a loss for words. She began to see the truth in Blake's perspective, realizing the fault might not lie with him after all. Blake was the last to arrive at the school, and upon her arrival, she was sorted into Slytherin. This decision seemed to confirm her intention to avoid Blake, a notion that puzzled Cassandra. She couldn't quite put her finger on what felt off about the situation. Before she had time to ponder further, Blake confronted her, accusing her of playing with his feelings and deliberately avoiding him. "I thought we would become best friends, but now I see that's not possible," Blake lamented, his disappointment evident. Cassandra was at a loss for words, struggling to comprehend the situation. I misunderstood you," she finally managed to stammer out. Blake, however, was resolute. "But I didn't misunderstand you. You're just a bad woman who toyed with my emotions," he retorted, his voice laced with bitterness. As Blake intensified his accusations, Cassandra's panic grew. She admitted her mistake, acknowledging that her choice to join Slytherin had deeply affected him. "I didn't realize how much my decision would impact you," she confessed, her voice trembling. Blake, however, seemed to soften. "It's all right. The Sorting Hat made no mistake. I belong in Hufflepuff, where my love for plants, animals, and food can flourish. And you truly belong in Slytherin," he said, acknowledging their differences. "But forcing me into Slytherin was wrong," Blake continued, delivering a metaphorical blow that left Cassandra reeling with guilt. "I was selfish to want you there without considering your feelings." Cassandra's heart was in turmoil as she realized the extent of her selfishness. "I'm sorry. Can we start over? Be friends again?" she pleaded, her sincerity shining through her previously arrogant demeanor. As they conversed, the Malfoy trio stumbled upon the scene. Malfoy, in particular, was shocked to see the usually cold and aloof Cassandra in such a vulnerable state, confessing to Blake. Overwhelmed by the sight, Malfoy fled in disbelief, leaving Crabbe and Goyle confused by their master's sudden departure. Meanwhile, Blake Disco varied the Room of Requirement, a place perfect for his ambition to cultivate dangerous plants and possibly magical creatures. "This room can fulfill any request, right? I need a space to grow some special plants," Blake explained to Cassandra, who was now genuinely interested in his endeavors. Cassandra, now humbled and eager to mend their friendship, followed Blake, curious about his project. The room, known for granting the desires of those who seek it, promised a new beginning for their friendship and Blake's ambitious plans. "How did you find this place?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "This is a spot I stumbled upon purely by chance," he replied with a hint of pride in his voice. "Chance? But you haven't even been at Hogwarts for a full day yet," I pointed out, incredulous at his claim. He faltered, momentarily caught off guard by my observation. The conversation took place in a secluded corner of the Hogwarts grounds, a place so hidden and serene it seemed almost magical in its tranquility. The lush greenery surrounding us whispered secrets of ancient magic, and the air was filled with the promise of adventure. It was hard to believe that he had discovered such a unique spot in less than 24 hours at the school. His ability to find such a place spoke volumes about his character. Curious, adventurous, and perhaps a bit reckless. Yet, there was an undeniable charm to his enthusiasm and the sense of wonder he brought to our exploration. Chapter 57, The Room of Requirement. Hermione praised. "Good job. You've all been avoiding detection, right?" Blake cleared his throat and began, "Here's an interesting story. I was at Professor Dumbledore's office and stumbled upon some notes he had written. According to these records, one night, as he walked past the tapestry of Barnabas being outwitted by a troll, he felt a sudden urge to use the restroom. Despite searching, he couldn't find one. However, on his third pass by the tapestry, a door appeared on the opposite wall. Inside, he discovered a lavishly decorated bathroom. Blake gestured towards the blank wall in front of them, devoid of any portraits, as he fabricated the tale. "And how does this relate to finding a place to grow plants?" Cassandra inquired, her curiosity piqued. "That's exactly the point," Blake continued. "Dumbledore was thinking about needing a restroom, and on his third pass, it appeared. It makes you wonder if Ravenclaw, when redesigning the castle, would go to the lengths of concealing a restroom. It seems more plausible that she'd hide a secret room in such a manner." Cassandra's eyes widened in realization. "So, if we walk past this spot 3 times, thinking about what we need. Exactly, Blake interjected. If we think about finding a room suitable for growing magical plants and animals, it's very likely that such a room will appear. Cassandra nodded, her excitement growing. Shall we test this magical theory together? As they prepared to test their hypothesis, a sense of camaraderie and intellectual kinship blossomed between them. For Cassandra, finding a peer who matched her intellect was a novel experience. Together, they were determined to unravel the mysteries of the world. Blake nodded at her, then began pacing in front of the wall, muttering, "I need a room where I can grow magical plants and animals." After walking back and forth 3 times, Cassandra pointed excitedly at the wall. "Look, it's appearing!" The blank wall began to transform, revealing the outline of a door, which then materialized into a tangible entrance. "Let's go," Blake said with a smile, opening the door. They stepped into the room of requirement, and the door vanished behind them, leaving the wall pristine once more. Inside, they were greeted by an endless plain under a clear blue sky, the warm sun bathing them in light. It dawned on them that Ravenclaw's design cleverly simulated outdoor conditions, making it an ideal environment for cultivating mystical plants and raising magical animals. "This is the room of requirement," Blake exclaimed, testing the room's capabilities further. With a thought, a small wooden house sprang up from the ground. Cassandra gasped. "How did you do that?" Blake grinned. "It seems the room adapts to our needs. So, if I imagine a change, like wanting a wooden house for rest, it materializes. I believe we can even alter the weather here." Cassandra stared at Blake in awe, realizing the limitless potential of the room of requirement. Together, they stood on the brink of countless possibilities, ready to explore and discover the secrets it held. Cassandra had always been proud, but in this moment, she felt a genuine admiration for Blake. From the depths of her heart, she exclaimed, "Oh, Blake, you're truly a genius." Based on the mere hints left by Professor Dumbledore, Blake had discovered such an enchanting place and instantly envisioned its myriad magical possibilities. If this wasn't a mark of genius, what was? Suddenly, Blake's system chimed in. Strong feelings of worship and admiration have been detected, followed by, "Congratulations to the host for obtaining a gold treasure chest." Tears welled up in Blake's eyes as he received another golden treasure chest, a rarity these days. Perhaps the so-called novice protection period had ended, or maybe it was because the novelty of his achievements had worn off, leading to a decrease in the frequency of treasure chest drops. However, Blake wasn't concerned. He knew that people's memories were short-lived, and the excitement would eventually reset after a cool-down period. "I'm not a genius," Blake humbly protested. "Ha! If you're not a genius, then what does that make us?" Cassandra retorted, looking at him with a mix of helplessness and admiration. She knew that even with access to Dumbledore's records, she could never have uncovered such a magical place. "Enough with the modesty," she exclaimed. "Where's the seed I gave you earlier? Let's plant it." Blake shook his head. "I can't." "Why? Didn't you bring it? Have you forgotten we have class this afternoon?" "Ah! Oh no, I'm going to be late." Realizing the time, they both rushed out of the room of requirement and hurried to their respective classrooms. Blake was late for his second class of the semester, a spellcasting class taught by Professor Flitwick. Upon his arrival, he found Professor Flitwick standing on a stack of books, taking attendance. Just as Blake appeared, Flitwick excitedly called out Harry Potter's name, lost his balance, and tumbled to the ground, disappearing beneath the books. Blake rushed over, and after some searching, managed to extract Professor Flitwick from the pile. "Professor, are you okay?" Blake asked, concerned. "Oh, thank you," Flitwick replied, rubbing his sore back and standing up with difficulty, a large bump visible on his forehead from where a book had struck him during his fall. Blake, wanting to help but not reveal the full extent of his abilities, took out his silver wand. Pointing it at the bump on Flitwick's forehead, he chanted, "Heal as before." Instantly, the pain vanished, much to Flitwick's relief. "Oh, what a professional spellcasting gesture! What an excellent healing spell! Child, who taught you to cast spells like this?" Flitwick inquired, impressed by Blake's skill, despite his young age. Seeing Flitwick's enthusiastic praise, the other students began to send bronze treasure chests to Blake, though the frequency had decreased due to their growing accustomed to his remarkable abilities. Blake knew it might take a couple of days for the excitement to build up again. I actually learned from Professor Dumbledore for a while, Blake replied respectfully, maintaining his humble demeanor amidst the admiration. Oh, so it's you? Professor Flitwick's eyes lit up with recognition. He had heard rumors that Professor Dumbledore had taken a child under his wing, a child with remarkably skilled spellcasting gestures and astonishing talent. No wonder Dumbledore would adopt him, Professor Flitwick mused, a hint of envy in his tone. If only I had met Blake sooner, I might have been tempted to take him under my wing as well. What a shame he didn't choose Ravenclaw. He embodies the very essence of our house. As the head of Ravenclaw, Professor Flitwick couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. All right, find a seat and sit down, and remember to come earlier next time, Professor Flitwick advised, his tone shifting to a more practical matter. Blake's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. He had hoped his tardiness had gone unnoticed, but Professor Flitwick was more observant than he had given him credit for. As he scanned the classroom for an available seat, his gaze fell on Wayne and Roger, but something else caught his attention. Several empty seats surrounded Hermione, suggesting that she might be facing isolation from her fellow Gryffindor girls. Blake couldn't help but speculate that Hermione's pride and tendency to lecture might have alienated her from her peers. With a mischievous glint in his eye, Blake chose to sit next to Hermione, ignoring the surprised and somewhat disapproving looks from others in the room. Hermione stiffened, clearly taken aback by his choice. "Why are you sitting next to me?" Hermione whispered, her voice tinged with confusion and a hint of irritation. "Because there's an empty seat here," Blake replied with a grin, enjoying the moment. "This is Gryffindor's seat," Hermione protested, her voice rising slightly as she glanced around at their classmates who were watching the exchange with interest. "But Professor Flitwick said we could sit anywhere," Blake countered, spreading his hands in a gesture of innocence. "And I'd rather not sit in the Hufflepuff section. Besides, it's not like I'm breaking any rules." Professor Flitwick, overhearing their conversation, chimed in with a supportive smile. "Indeed, I did say you could sit anywhere. It's beneficial to sit next to friends for a more effective learning experience." Feeling vindicated by the professor's words, Blake turned his attention back to Hermione, who had resumed studying her spellbook. "It seems no one else wanted to sit with you, so I thought I'd keep you company," he said softly, hoping to ease the tension. Hermione responded with a quiet hum, choosing not to engage further. Despite her initial resistance, Blake's presence was a small comfort. The isolation she had been facing was painful, and having someone choose to sit with her, regardless of the circumstances, was a balm to her wounded pride. Just as Hermione was about to quietly express her gratitude, her expression soured. The familiar scent of perfume on Blake hinted at his recent company, the very woman Hermione had reasons to dislike. Her fleeting moment of appreciation vanished, replaced by a resurgence of anger. Meanwhile, Professor Flitwick began the class with a discussion on wand techniques and shared anecdotes from his dueling days, infusing the lesson with his characteristic humor. Despite the rocky start, the class settled into an engaging session, leaving the earlier tension between Blake and Hermione simmering beneath the surface. The class had taken an unexpected turn, becoming far more engaging than anticipated. Laughter and smiles were common among the students, a stark contrast to Hermione's demeanor. Throughout the lesson, her expression remained somber, untouched by the jovial atmosphere that had enveloped the classroom. Blake, noticing her mood, couldn't help but let a mischievous grin play at the corners of his mouth. As the class neared its end, he leaned over and gently nudged Hermione. Startled, she whispered sharply, "What are you doing?" Blake's voice was low, but filled with a hint of playfulness. "Hermione, the reason I was late earlier," he paused for effect, "is because I was with Cassandra." Hermione's eyes widened in shock, her previous annoyance momentarily forgotten. "Good Lord, you two aren't even trying to be discreet anymore, are you?" Her tone was a mix of disbelief and a hint of amusement, reflecting the unexpectedness of Blake's revelation. Chapter 58, Reflections and Realizations. If they hadn't been in the middle of class, Hermione might have hurled the book on the table straight at Blake's face. Her frustration was palpable. It's one thing to be secretive, she began, her voice laced with irritation. But now, you're openly admitting you were alone together? What are you trying to prove? Are you taunting me? Or should I be offering my congratulations? Do you dislike Cassandra? Blake inquired, unfazed by her outburst. Hermione huffed, her annoyance growing. Why do you ask? It's rare for someone to harbor dislike without reason, Li Tianlin interjected calmly. I just don't like her, Hermione admitted, her anger simmering. She's arrogant, always belittling others. Yes, she's talented, but that doesn't give her the right to act as if she's superior to everyone else, and she's utterly indifferent to the feelings of others when she speaks. Blake couldn't help but laugh at her explanation, which only fueled Hermione's rage. What's so amusing? She demanded, barely containing her fury. You're upset because she's arrogant and dismissive, correct? Blake continued, still chuckling. Aren't those reasons enough to find her behavior detestable? Hermione glared at him, her hands itching to grab her textbook and throw it at his smug face. What are you getting at? Blake's tone turned serious. Doesn't she remind you of someone? She's talented, knowledgeable, proud, and arrogant. She looks down on others and disregards their feelings. As he spoke, Hermione's face drained of color. She realized the parallel Blake was drawing. The traits she loathed in Cassandra were ones she saw in herself. She, too, was talented and knowledgeable, often preaching to others without considering their feelings. Do you see the similarity now? Blake asked gently. Hermione was speechless, the realization hitting her hard. She was the person she despised. Blake continued, You and Cassandra are alike in many ways, both talented, both proud, yet you've managed to make a friend like me. Imagine the common ground you could find with her. Despite your different backgrounds, your experiences have shaped you similarly. You've both grown up believing no one could match your intellect. He paused, letting his words sink in. If you can learn to see the multifaceted nature of people, you'll discover the beauty in those you previously dismissed. The goal isn't to find an opponent, but to understand and appreciate the kindness in others. Hermione's anger had dissipated, replaced by a sense of guilt. She remembered a recent encounter with her peers, her dismissive response to their friendly overtures, and felt ashamed. She realized how her behavior had isolated her, even from potential friends. Sitting next to Blake, her only friend who had remained by her side despite her flaws, Hermione felt a profound sense of shame. He had shown her a mirror to her own behavior, and for the first time, she truly saw herself through the eyes of others. My bad habits, Hermione mused, her voice soft but filled with newfound understanding. He's willing to admit that he's my friend. What right do I have to be angry at him? She turned to Blake, her eyes sincere. Blake, I'm sorry. Thank you for being willing to continue being my friend. And thank you for reminding me. I know what to do in the future. Blake felt a surge of joy as the system notifications chimed in his mind, signaling not only the acquisition of a golden treasure chest, but also the satisfaction of having enlightened Hermione. He had hoped to prevent her from becoming isolated, a situation exacerbated by the unintended butterfly effects of his presence. Hermione, Harry, and Ronald's relationship hadn't developed as it might have, potentially altering Hermione's personal growth and leading to her ostracization. Moreover, Blake had been concerned about explaining his encounter with Cassandra, but now it seemed Hermione might no longer be curious about it. However, just as Blake was basking in his relief, Hermione's next question caught him off guard. But, what you told me, what does it have to do with you being with Cassandra and almost being late? Blake turned to face her, noticing the earnest look in her eyes. Despite the unexpected turn in their conversation, Blake, ever the smooth talker, replied with feigned surprise. Have you forgotten? Like you, she only has one friend, which is me. So naturally, she can only stay with me. She's just trying to find other friends. She needs to have friends too. Think about yourself. Other than me, do you have any friends? You're disliked for just a little habit of preaching. Imagine how she feels with her, let's say, challenging personality. Hermione considered his words, recalling her own experiences with Cassandra's sharp tongue, which was indeed more severe than her own tendency to lecture. She bit her lip, contemplating the dynamics between Blake and Cassandra. You two stay together, I thought. Hermione trailed off, leaving her thoughts unspoken. Blake, feigning shock, exclaimed, "What are you thinking? Can't there be pure friendship between men and women? Wait, what do you mean? Are you all lusting after my body?" "I'm still a child. You female hooligans," he joked, only to be met with Hermione's frustration as she threw her book of spells at him. "Ahem, that's too much. Too much." Professor Flitwick, who had been trying to ignore their whispering during his lesson, finally intervened, deeming their interaction a bit too flirtatious for the classroom. "Sorry, Professor. I saw a bug on his face just now, so I actually just wanted to kill that bug." Hermione apologized to Professor Flitwick, who, despite his skepticism about her bug-killing method, decided to let it go. Later, during their first herbology class with Professor Sprout, the students were introduced to various magical plants and mushrooms in the greenhouse, learning about their cultivation and uses. When Professor Sprout asked about a particular plant with round leaves, both Hermione and Blake were eager to answer. "This is white fresh, Professor. It has very strong healing properties." Blake answered promptly, even before Professor Sprout could acknowledge his raised hand. Although the professor was slightly taken aback by Blake's eagerness, he couldn't help but feel a hint of dissatisfaction at being preempted. This interaction highlighted Blake's enthusiasm for herbology, but also his tendency to jump ahead, a trait that would surely make his time at Hogwarts interesting and perhaps a bit challenging for both his professors and peers. Blake was a student who had already made a name for himself at Hogwarts. He was the little genius who had kept the Sorting Hat deliberating for over 10 minutes the previous night, much to Professor McGonagall's chagrin. In essence, Blake was a student brimming with curiosity and a thirst for knowledge, traits that did not go unnoticed by his professors. "Correct answer, 5 points for Hufflepuff," Professor Sprout announced, her smile so wide that her eyes nearly disappeared into the creases of her face. Hermione, however, shot Blake an indignant glare. She couldn't believe it. Blake had just raised his hand and answered a question without any apparent effort. How was that even possible? Blake, for his part, ignored Hermione's glare. He was more focused on the silver treasure chest he had just earned through his contributions in class. Hermione, not one to be outdone, quickly adapted. When Professor Sprout posed the next question, Hermione was ready. She had memorized the textbook back to front, and the question posed was no challenge for her. Her answer was precise and correct. Blake, however, chose not to compete directly with Hermione. Instead, he waited for her to answer before raising his hand to add additional insights, information that wasn't found in any textbook. Hermione was frustrated by this. She couldn't fathom where Blake was acquiring this extra knowledge. Yet, from Professor Sprout's increasingly delighted reactions, it was clear that Blake's contributions were accurate and valuable. Although Miss Granger's answer was quite correct, Professor Sprout began, Mr. Green provided the extracurricular knowledge I was planning to share with the class later. Therefore, Miss Granger earns 2 points for Gryffindor, and Mr. Green earns points for Hufflepuff. Professor Sprout found herself more and more impressed with Blake. Hufflepuff students were often seen as less competitive, their house not typically known for winning the school championship due to a perceived lack of ambition. However, Blake was challenging that stereotype, earning points through his keen understanding of herbology. After the class, Blake's exceptional performance earned him a gold treasure chest from a delighted Professor Sprout. Hermione, however, remained indignant about Blake's method of earning points. "You can't blame me for that." Blake responded with a shrug when Hermione voiced her frustration. "I'm in Hufflepuff. How can we just hand over points to Gryffindor?" Later, at dinner, the conversation shifted. Blake's roommate, Wayne Hopkins, leaned over with a question that caught Blake off guard. "Do you have a grudge against that Gryffindor girl?" Blake was taken aback. "How can you think I have a grudge against her?" he replied, genuinely surprised. Roger Malone, another friend, joined in. "It's just that we saw you two arguing all afternoon. In the magic class, you were constantly challenging her, and she seemed really upset with you. At one point, she even threw a magic textbook at your face. And you're saying there's no grudge?" Wayne and Roger were concerned for Blake, having witnessed the tension between him and Hermione. Despite their playful banter, It was clear that Blake and Hermione's rivalry was more about academic competition than any real animosity. Blake found himself at a loss for words. The scene unfolded during their herbology class, where Hermione Granger was the only student eagerly raising her hand to answer every question posed by Professor Sprout. From the back of the classroom, Blake too raised his hand, but his actions were interpreted differently. It appeared as though he was singling out Hermione, challenging her at every turn. Yet, Blake knew there were others in Gryffindor who participated just as eagerly. He sighed, reflecting on his true intentions. His goal had been simple: to impress Professor Sprout and perhaps discover a hidden treasure chest mentioned in rumors. The thought of antagonizing Hermione had never crossed his mind. The misunderstanding had painted a peculiar picture of their interactions, one that Blake was keen to correct. Actually, we don't have a grudge. He spent considerable time explaining to his two bemused roommates. It took a while, but they finally seemed to accept his explanation, albeit reluctantly. Just as Blake was about to return to his meal, feeling a wave of relief wash over him, Cedric Diggory approached him. Cedric, with his charming looks that Blake jokingly considered to be only slightly inferior to his own, sat down beside him with a probing question. "I heard that you have a grudge against a girl in Gryffindor?" Cedric inquired, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Blake couldn't help but respond with a mix of frustration and disbelief. "You're kidding me. You're really sticking your nose into this, too?" The exchange highlighted the rapid spread of rumors within Hogwarts, turning a simple misunderstanding into a topic of intrigue. Blake realized that clearing up this misconception wouldn't be as straightforward as he hoped, especially with Cedric's unexpected interest in the matter. Chapter 59. Blake's Persuasion, Transforming Hufflepuff's Image. Blake found himself once again explaining his actions to Cedric, eager to clarify that his intentions were purely to comfort a troubled student, not to bully or seek revenge. He stressed that he never intended to cause any trouble. Cedric, however, remained skeptical, especially considering the student had physically lashed out at Blake. "You have to understand, Cedric," Blake began with a sigh. "Even though I strive to be a force for good, intervening to stop negative behavior and offer guidance, it's not always received well. Despite good intentions, misunderstandings are common. People often assume the worst, thinking you're meddling or up to no good, especially when the advice you offer is hard to hear. And yes, it might even lead to me getting hit, but that's a risk I'm willing to take. I can't just stand by when I see someone like Miss Granger struggling, isolated from her peers on her very first day. It's my duty to help her see a different perspective, to encourage her to make changes that could help her forge new friendships. Isn't it a good thing to help a fellow student avoid isolation?" Cedric listened, his expression shifting as Blake's words sank in. The notion of selflessly helping others, even at one's own expense, struck a chord with him. "So, Miss Granger has decided to change because of your persuasion?" he asked, a note of awe in his voice. Blake nodded confidently. "Yes, she's agreed to try, but it's something I'll have to keep an eye on. If she struggles, I'll be there to support her, even if it means facing her wrath again." Cedric was moved by Blake's dedication, recognizing the purity of his intentions. "You truly are a good person, Blake, misunderstood and even attacked, yet you remain committed to helping others. That's the essence of Hufflepuff." However, Cedric's admiration was momentarily clouded by confusion. "But why then did you challenge her in herbology class?" Blake's response was earnest. "It wasn't about making things difficult for her, Cedric. It's about addressing the root of her isolation. She's developed a superiority complex, believing herself unmatched. If I don't challenge that belief, all my efforts to persuade her would be in vain. Moreover, as Hufflepuffs, we can't just stand by and watch Professor Sprout, our head of house, give away points to students from other houses with a resigned look. Though our chances at the House Cup may seem slim, we owe it to her to try." Cedric's eyes filled with tears as he grasped the depth of Blake's commitment, not just to their fellow student, but to their house and its reputation. "You're right. We've been complacent, ignoring the competition and, by extension, Professor Sprout's feelings. We've been selfish, focusing only on our comfort, oblivious to the sacrifices she makes for us." Motivated by Blake's example, Cedric vowed to rally their housemates. We can't afford to be seen as the lazy house any longer. It's time we shed that unfair label and fought for our honor, for Professor Sprout's sake. Blake, you're not alone in this fight. We'll stand with you, striving to transform Hufflepuff's image together. Blake's words had not only enlightened Cedric, but also ignited a newfound determination within him and potentially the entire Hufflepuff house. Together, they were poised to challenge perceptions and redefine what it meant to be a Hufflepuff, all thanks to Blake's unwavering spirit and compassionate heart. Alone, me, and all of us, will fight for this goal with you. Cedric concluded his speech, then turned to spread the message of resistance among the other students. The emotions in his voice were so moving that it felt like a reward in itself, a golden treasure chest of sorts. Blake was taken aback. Cedric, you actually know how to self-motivate? Wait a minute, what was I trying to say? Blake pondered for a while before standing up, realizing his initial intention had been merely to clarify that he bore no grudge against Hermione. The last few words he had spoken offhandedly had somehow inspired the entire Hufflepuff house to take action. Not far away, under the influence of Cedric's speech, the Hufflepuff students began to chant slogans, their spirits ignited. Blake scratched his head in bewilderment. How did things escalate to this? After dinner, before 9 o'clock in the evening, the young wizards had free time. They could use this period to complete the homework assigned by their professors during the day. However, since it was the first day of classes, only Professor McGonagall had assigned homework, which was to practice transforming matches into needles. Professors Flitwick and Sprout had not given any homework. Yet, as Blake passed by the stairs leading to the library, he noticed a large group of Hufflepuff students heading there, including Cedric. Catching sight of Blake, Cedric clenched his fist, bent his arm, and paused, as if to say, "Come on!" Blake felt utterly bewildered by the turn of events his offhand comments had caused among the Hufflepuffs. "Hey, calm down! You're Hufflepuffs!" Blake muttered to himself, receiving a note from Hagrid inviting him for a barbecue that evening, a plan they had made the day before. Blake, having not eaten much at dinner, welcomed the idea, his stomach ready for more. On his way to Hagrid's hut, Blake encountered Cassandra at the entrance of the auditorium, seemingly looking for someone. "Hello, Cassandra," he greeted her casually, only to be abruptly stopped by her. "Where are you going?" "Let's go to the room we were in at noon. Let's continue." Before she could finish, Hermione's shocked voice interrupted them. "The room at noon? You continue?" Blake sighed internally, wishing for less coincidence in timing. "Hermione, what if I told you we were just growing herbs in the room? Would you believe it?" Hermione's skepticism was palpable. "Growing herbs? In the room? Do you even believe that yourself?" Realizing further explanation was futile, Blake decided to clear the air by showing them. He quickly took each girl by the hand, pulling them out of the auditorium and up to the 8th floor, despite their protests. Thankfully, they encountered no one else on their way, avoiding any awkward explanations. Upon reaching the 8th floor, both Cassandra and Hermione were disoriented from the rapid ascent, their surroundings a blur until they finally came to a stop. "You'll understand I'm not lying soon," Blake assured them. Cassandra snorted softly, still skeptical. Earlier that day, she had been easily persuaded by Blake, but now she awaited his explanation with a mix of curiosity and doubt. Hermione was determined not to lose her temper in front of Blake, fearing he might later accuse her of being selfish. "You're all my friends," Blake began, his voice steady as he paced back and forth in front of a seemingly blank wall. "It's fine for me to share this with you. When I'm not available, you could help me take care of the plants and animals." After a moment, a door materialized on the wall, and as Hermione stepped into the room of requirement, she was astounded by Blake's revelation. He had indeed been cultivating herbs in the room, and now sought their assistance in tending to the plants and animals during his absences. Blake, recognizing the value of teamwork, especially with Hermione and Cassandra, who were both exceptionally bright and diligent students, found them to be perfect candidates for his assistance. He humorously thought that if he had asked Neville, despite his herbology talent, he might have been more of a concern. The room unfolded before Hermione as an endless plain, leaving her in awe. How did you discover this place? It's incredible, she exclaimed. I stumbled upon it by chance, Blake replied casually, pulling out a small cloth bag filled with seeds given to him by Cassandra. Together, they began to alter the room's environment to suit their needs and started planting the seeds. Blake took this opportunity to explain how he had found the room, earning an impressed exclamation from Hermione. You're a genius, Blake. Cassandra, overhearing the compliment, couldn't help but smirk. Later, as Blake received another golden treasure chest in his system space, he felt a sense of satisfaction, acknowledging the increasing challenge in keeping his activities a secret. Hermione, now fully engaged in helping, curiously inquired about the nature of the seeds they were planting. Blake's casual mention of poisonous tentacles, mandrake, and China's biting kale alarmed her. Wait, she interrupted, her shock evident. If you're caught with these, it's not just firing you'd have to worry about. You could end up in Azkaban. Blake's response was calm. If no one knows, I won't be fired. But if you're discovered, Hermione's concern was palpable. Blake and Cassandra exchanged glances before turning their attention to Hermione, their stares making her uneasy. Why are you looking at me like that? Do I seem like someone who would report you? To Hermione's dismay, both nodded. Well, you do. Frustrated, Hermione glared at them, but Blake approached her, his tone soft but persuasive. You wouldn't want your good friend to be fired, would you, Hermione? No, I don't want that, she admitted reluctantly. Then you'll have to trust me, Blake concluded with a laugh, signaling the end of their planting session. By the time Blake arrived at Hagrid's hut, it was only about 7 in the evening. Harry and Ronald were already there enjoying a barbecue. Oh, you're a bit late, Blake, Hagrid observed, spotting him. Sorry, something came up, Hagrid. Also, I brought 2 friends along. I hope that's okay. I didn't inform you beforehand. Blake apologized, gesturing towards Hermione and Cassandra, who were curiously inspecting Hagrid's hut. Hagrid, ever the gracious host, dismissed the apology with a generous wave. It's okay, Blake. The more, the merrier, right? Besides, I'm glad you're making new friends. Hagrid's welcoming attitude underscored his desire for Blake's visit, highlighting the importance he placed on friendship and community. She had a craving for the meat he grilled himself. After all, Blake's culinary skills were so exceptional they made her question her entire life's experiences with food. So when Blake arrived, he didn't just bring 2 additional girls with him. Even if he had brought along an 8-eyed giant spider, she wouldn't have been surprised. Oh, right, Hagrid. There's something I need to ask you. Blake reached into the pocket of his floating cloak and pulled out an iron cage. Inside the cage, a spider that Hagrid recognized all too well was securely locked away. You actually brought an 8-eyed giant spider? Hagrid exclaimed, his voice a mixture of astonishment and disbelief. I think I should go buy a lottery ticket today, Blake joked, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Ding! Unexpected emotion detected, a voice chimed in Blake's head, followed by a series of notifications. Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining a silver treasure chest. Ding! Extreme fear has been detected. Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining a gold treasure chest. Blake's gaze shifted to Ronald, whose face had contorted in fear. He then remembered that spiders were Ronald's greatest fear, a dark shadow that loomed over his childhood. The realization brought a slight, almost imperceptible, curl to the corners of Blake's mouth. The scene unfolded with a mix of humor and tension as Blake's actions inadvertently triggered Ronald's phobia, while also showcasing Blake's peculiar sense of humor and his unexpected ability to summon rewards from seemingly thin air. The interaction between the characters hinted at deeper layers of their relationships and past experiences, setting the stage for further developments in their story. Chapter 60. A Cunning Plan and Mrs. Norris's Dilemma. Oh, where did you find this 8-eyed giant spider? Hagrid exclaimed, his eyes widening in surprise and a hint of concern. For you, this is a dangerous creature, Hagrid finally acknowledged, stating what was obvious to everyone else. However, in his eyes, this furry creature, which could grow into a monstrous size, was still somewhat endearing. Well, it all started on the train yesterday, Blake began, recounting the incident with the 8-eyed spider on the Hogwarts Express. He detailed how the spider had exploded in size due to a swelling spell and how he had been knocked unconscious by a stick. The event had attracted quite an audience, so Harry and Ron were also aware of it. Hagrid, looking genuinely surprised, asked, "Casting a swelling spell on a baby eight-eyed spider? Oh, isn't that akin to amplifying the destructive potential of a mischievous child by more than tenfold?" Hagrid mused aloud. No wonder it was so ravenous on the train. The spell not only caused it to grow, but also to deplete its energy reserves rapidly, making it desperately hungry. Blake nodded, understanding Hagrid's point. At that moment, the spider had been seeking something to consume immediately, which could have led it to attack someone if it hadn't found an alternative. Then there's the matter of Lee Jordan, Hagrid continued, shifting the topic slightly. Where did he find this eight-eyed spider? Such creatures are exceedingly rare. Blake explained that Lee had caught it near the Forbidden Forest before the summer vacation, intending to use it to scare people. The spider was much smaller at that time. Hagrid pondered for a moment before muttering something under her breath. Blake caught the name Aragog among the muffled words, realizing Hagrid must have recognized the spider as a descendant of Aragog. You know, I had quite the trouble last semester with the Weasley twins and their friends being chased out of the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid reminisced. But don't worry, Blake. Leave this little one to me. Since the spider was a descendant of Aragog, Hagrid planned to release it back into the Forbidden Forest, where it would naturally rejoin its family. Blake had no objections to this plan. Although he could have kept the spider in the House of Whims, Cassandra's fear of spiders made that option less appealing. Handing it over to Hagrid seemed like the best course of action, ensuring it would return to its natural habitat and relieve Blake of the responsibility of feeding it. Blake had tamed the eight-eyed giant spider using his druid skills, ensuring that even if it lived in the Forbidden Forest, it would respond to his call. He envisioned waiting until the spider grew larger to collect its venom. Moreover, Blake harbored a more ambitious plan, to use his druid abilities to strengthen the spider, potentially allowing it to lead the tribe and even take Aragog's place as the king of the giant eight-eyed spider tribe. Lost in his thoughts, Blake let out a loud, mischievous laugh, startling Hermione. "Hey, Blake, why are you laughing so ominously?" Hermione asked, hitting him on the arm. "Oh, I'm sorry. I just thought of something amusing," Blake replied, trying to dismiss his earlier laughter. Hermione sighed in relief, glad that Blake had decided to hand over the spider. The idea of keeping such a creature in the House of Whims had made her uneasy. Although she wasn't as terrified of spiders as Cassandra, the thought of encountering such a ferocious beast was still unsettling. No girl would appreciate the presence of a giant spider lurking around, after all. In the midst of their evening, Blake began to assist Hagrid with his tasks, one of which included barbecuing. Despite having already eaten, the enticing aroma of the barbecue, enhanced by Blake's homemade seasoning, piqued the interest of Cassandra, Hermione, and even Ronald, who had been previously preoccupied with his fear of the iron cage nearby. "Come, try my cooking," Blake invited, as he served the barbecue on a plate and placed it on a table outside Hagrid's house. The irresistible scent drew everyone closer, including the usually reserved Cassandra. They eagerly reached for the cutlery, unable to resist the temptation. "It's so delicious," Harry exclaimed, his eyes glistening with emotion. "What if we can't eat such delicious barbecue in the future?" The conversation was sparse, as everyone was too engrossed in savoring Blake's culinary masterpiece. Hermione and Cassandra, having smaller appetites and having eaten dinner earlier, were the first to stop. Harry also didn't eat much, but Ronald's eating pace was astonishing, rivaling even Hagrid's. Blake, noticing the appreciation for his cooking, silently collected the few silver treasure chests that appeared as a reward for his delicious barbecue. Then, with a subtle movement of his fingers, he triggered a slight metallic sound that went unnoticed by the others. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed as a large hole appeared in the iron cage, and the giant eight-eyed spider larva burst out, heading straight for the Forbidden Forest. Ronald's reaction was the most extreme. He fainted from sheer terror as the spider leaped over him, causing Blake to lament the downgrade from a potential gold to a silver treasure chest due to Ronald's fear. After the spider had made its escape, Hagrid noted the transformation of the iron cage back into a cake box, assuring everyone that the spider had returned to the Forbidden Forest. Blake then attended to Ronald, using his druid powers to revive him. Ronald's immediate reaction was to leap into Harry's arms, screaming about the spider, much to Harry's discomfort and Hermione's amusement. Cassandra, though also afraid of spiders, managed to maintain her composure, unlike Ronald. "It's okay, the spider has left," Blake reassured them, highlighting the healing capabilities of druid magic, which could mend both physical and mental wounds. This incident served as a test of its effectiveness on Ronald. Eventually, Ronald calmed down and apologized to Harry for his overreaction. Harry, trying to maintain some distance to avoid another unwelcome embrace, reassured Ronald, though his slight step back raised questions about the solidity of their friendship in Ronald's mind. After bidding farewell to Hagrid and the others, Blake checked the time. It was 8:30 p.m., leaving him just half an hour before curfew. However, instead of heading back to the Hufflepuff common room, a mischievous idea struck him. Why not embark on a nocturnal adventure? After all, did one really need a reason for a little nighttime exploration? Today had been a whirlwind of activities for Blake, and he hadn't had a moment's rest. Now, with the castle's corridors quiet and empty, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to satisfy his curiosity about the places he'd longed to see in his previous life. If only I could turn invisible, Blake mused, regretting that he hadn't practiced the illusion spell earlier. He imagined the freedom of roaming Hogwarts unseen, much like Dumbledore could with his powerful magic. Just as he was about to turn back and work on his spellcasting, his cloak, which had magically transformed into a school uniform earlier, surprised him. A small blue hand emerged from the fabric, patting his shoulder gently. "What's the matter?" Blake asked, puzzled. In an instant, the cloak reverted to its original form and enveloped him, rendering him invisible. Blake was astounded. "Damn it, you can turn invisible too? And this level of invisibility, it's flawless." Unlike the typical illusory body curse, which might leave a faint trace or blur when he moved, this cloak made him completely invisible, much like Harry Potter's famed invisibility cloak, but even more convenient. With this cloak, Blake didn't have to worry about any part of him accidentally becoming visible. With his newfound invisibility, Blake felt unstoppable. "Then where should I go?" he pondered. A moment later, an idea sparked in his mind: Filch's office. Many underestimated the value of the Pheasant Sec, a Redacre's office, but Blake knew better. It was a treasure trove of confiscated items from generations of Hogwarts students, including the Marauders map, which Fred and George Weasley had famously liberated during their first year. Eager to discover what other secrets Filch's office held, Blake made his way there, his steps light and silent. Upon arrival, he noticed the office was empty, save for Mrs. Norris, Filch's vigilant cat, who seemed to sense something amiss. Before Mrs. Norris could react, Blake, utilizing his skills as an archdruid, gently lifted her up. He quickly calmed her with a combination of catmint, expert petting techniques, and a touch of druid magic. In no time, Mrs. Norris was purring contentedly in his arms. "Go and lead Mr. Filch away," Blake whispered to her. "Don't come back for an hour. You wouldn't want to miss out on this feeling, would you?" With a mischievous grin, Blake set his plan into motion, ready to uncover the hidden treasures of Filch's office. Blake overheard Mr. Filch's voice, filled with surprise. "You've caught a student out on a nighttime stroll?" His voice rose with incredulity. "On the 8th floor." A note of glee crept into his tone. "Excellent. Lead the way." With that, Filch hastened back to his office, his steps quick with anticipation. He retrieved a lantern, its light flickering to life in his eager hands. After ensuring the door was securely locked behind him, he dashed up the stairs, his breaths coming in heavy pants. As the sound of Filch's voice faded into the distance, an intriguing scene unfolded. The door to Filch's now deserted office creaked open, despite the lock having been securely fastened moments before. The lock, it seemed, had mysteriously slid to the other side, a testament to the unseen presence that had manipulated it. Blake, still shrouded in invisibility to avoid any unforeseen encounters, stepped into the office with caution. His eyes quickly scanned the room, landing on a box that immediately drew his attention. Emblazoned on the box was a warning that piqued his curiosity. "Confiscated items, high danger." The message was clear, yet it only served to heighten Blake's interest. The box, with its ominous label, promised secrets and possibly forbidden treasures. With a mixture of caution and excitement, Blake approached, ready to uncover what Filch deemed too dangerous to be left in the hands of Hogwarts students.